Hello, and welcome to Entangled, the podcast where we explore the science of consciousness, the true nature of reality, and what it means to be a spiritual being having a human experience. I'm your host, Jordan Youkilis, and today I'm joined by my friend, Wayne Clodfelter. In this conversation, we discuss Wayne's exploration of consciousness and human potential. Wayne describes a July 2022 close encounter with extraterrestrials and how that impacted the direction of his life. He describes the message from Sirius from where his soul originated. We discussed Dr. Stephen Greer's work on the ET phenomenon and how that led Wayne to the study of Vedic sciences at Maharishi International. Wayne explains how Blink-182's Tom DeLonge inspired his interest in extraterrestrials. We consider concepts of pure consciousness and spontaneous right action. Next, we discuss the Close Encounters classification system, the challenges associated with spiritual awakening, and connecting with our star family. Wayne and I discuss our recent close encounter of the fifth kind experience in Fairfield, Iowa. From there, Wayne describes his experience of incarceration, being locked in with the same person who murdered his best friend, and of being released during COVID. Wayne then explains his recovery from heroin, overcoming adversity, and his connection to the dog star Sirius. We then discuss Citizens for Disclosure and the cover-up of the ET/UFO/UAP phenomenon by military and intelligence agencies. We consider the duality, the darkness, and the light of our present day. We discuss Vimanas and the prevalence of flying craft in the Vedic literature. We conclude the discussion with ideas on how we can find ways to resolve conflict in the age of enlightenment without resulting to war. This outro is titled Om Mama Vimanas. Ending song Lightwork is by my friend Skits the PLK, whose documentary Calling All Hybrids can be viewed on Prime Video. Music from the show is available on the Spotify playlist Entangled The Vibes. If you like the show, please drop a 5-star review and subscribe on Substack, Spotify X, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Please enjoy the episode. Wayne Clodfelter, welcome to the Entangled podcast, my friend.
Howdy.
Good to chat tonight, man. I'm really excited to have you. For the audience's benefit, Wayne and I got connected. He reached out on social media as there have just been a lot of similarities in our journeys. As a lot of listeners know, I recently completed a master's degree at Maharishi International in Consciousness and Human Potential, where Wayne is currently enrolled and is close to completing his undergrad. So would love to talk about your journey, what drove you towards the exploration of consciousness and the wild world of Fairfield, Iowa. But yeah, Wayne, why don't you give the listeners a little bit of your origin story here?
Sure. I was born and raised in Powhatan, just outside of Richmond. I've been all over and found that, Powhatan is a calling for home. And, I have 2 kids here and a partner, Megan, my daughter, Marley, my son, Bentley. You might hear Bentley in the background. He's got some pipes on him, so just roll with it. But yeah, I love my family, and I feel like, you know, I'm taking this journey further down the world of consciousness and human potential for their sake. Um, and I feel like my experiences have led me to these opportunities to really give, my circle its best chance at fulfillment. And I know this is not all about me, and I have a rough past. I battled addiction and um faced incarceration, and that's taught me some big lessons about life. And I had some very hard losses. One of my best friends was murdered while I was incarcerated, and that really broke me to the point where normal life didn't make sense. A lot of things happened during that really proved that I had no idea what I was doing anymore, and I needed to find something bigger to plug into. So I made a calling, to the God of my understanding, and I started having these experiences. First one, the main one recently was July of 2022, and I kind of just said I celebrated my anniversary of that a couple weeks ago, and
Mm-hmm.
I it's all hitting me now that this is what I'm supposed to do. This I'm supposed to figure out our connection to these beings, um, figure out human potential, and connect, find unity.
What do you think is the connection between consciousness, unity, and the extraterrestrial experience?
A friend of mine today, I met him, and he said that we had a short discussion on this, short 1 hour discussion, but he said that he feels like we are a petri dish, and the ETs are the scientists trying to figure out how to help us, and so I think that unity gives us the opportunity to go to the stars, and ETs are like that hierarchy that kind of dictates that. Um, and in consciousness, like we are all one, the total number of minds in the universe is one. And so it's just like it's an experiment, but it's also, you know, separation back to unity, that journey. If you were just started at unity, it wouldn't be nearly as fun or as interesting or
Yeah.
as expansive as if you went back. So I think, yeah, there's like a hierarchy that kind of natural law guides them to um, help enforce, who, like humans, for instance, like maybe we aren't the only lesser species that is making these, you know, steps to really figure out our place in the cosmos. Maybe, there'll be more to come from this world. Maybe there's more on other worlds, and maybe the ETs in their hierarchy are just floating around, kind of, you know, helping balance.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. So you mentioned an experience 3 years ago. Would love if you would expand on what that experience entailed.
Sure, like I said, I've been through hard times and lost my best friend. And on a spiritual level, I still feel like he's communicating with me. And him and I had a, you know, experience when we were younger. And so it kind of always hung there. And, after a few, I would say after a few bad nights, it came to the point where I was really desperate for, trying to figure out why I, made it through so many close calls to death and why he was still, doing his best life and then he was taken away. And, I got desperate and prayed to the God of my understanding of just help something make sense because I was really struggling. And so I was by myself. My partner was in Alaska, and I went outside and put my feet in the ground and just, was about to bawl my eyes out. And I looked up at the sky and saw a blue plane like approaching,
Hmm.
but it wasn't like a normal jet blue plane. It was like glowing blue. and it was so low that like I knew it wasn't like some party plane. Like I thought like soul plane kind of like went through my mind at first. Like, like is this
Yeah.
some crazy kind of like party that's floating over top of me right now? And but then I was like, no, that plane's like there's no way that's going to like land correct because it's too close. And I just like shut down and blacked out. And then like when like finally came back to, I was like, what in the heck just happened? And it was just like instantly just like a download of so much like information. Like it was just and part of that was me being with beings that were saying that, oh, you want to know a purpose, here's a good one, like prepare humanity to make integration with us and
Mm.
contact with us. And I was like, all right, like, just now I was digging and digging, and I found that like Sirius was the main thing that kept popping up in my head and my mind, and as I'm digging, like that just kept like coming. And part of the message and like the download or whatever was like, yeah, this, we're from Sirius, and that's like where your
Wow.
soul is from.
Wow.
And like been you signed up for this your whole life, and like now like you are finally like at the point where it's you know obvious you need to be reminded of this. And it was just like immediately just truth. I was convinced it was 100% like that's what happened. I started calling my family and posting on Facebook like this just happened to me, everybody. And and of course everybody's like, Wayne, how much drugs have you done? Like, you know, like rightfully so, I get it, and like my partner's in Alaska and she's like, Wayne, like what's going on? Like all these people are calling me saying that, you're going crazy and blah blah blah. And I was like, no, Megan, like this really happened. Like and like the phone was breaking up because she's on the cruise ship. So it's just like crazy. And so the next day, like my dad shows up and he's like, you gotta watch out what you're saying, boy. People calling you crazy. You might end up in a loony bin. And like all this, it was just, and then immediately I'm like, no, no, like this was real. Like,
Yeah.
like, and so I just kept like, finding like more and more awareness of like my my individual purpose. And it was like you need to go learn, you need to go figure out like how to be your best. So when all of this starts happening, you can be um the beacon like that you're supposed to be, like. And I was always brought up in Christian church, and like that you know is still my base. Like Christ is my main spiritual um teacher. And so like all of that, like you have to like, what would Jesus do, and like so if like I can't deny this, like I have to, this is truth to me. So I have to find a way to make it make sense
Hmm.
to everybody else, and find my true niche and like what I'm, my dharma. I didn't learn
Hmm.
that term till after I went back to school. But and that's the thing, like I've never really been into, you know, Vedic sciences or like Hinduism or anything like that. But like after hearing Dr. Greer, um, it was obvious that following the Maharishi was a big um, impact in
Hmm.
how
Hmm.
he's able to do what he's doing.
Hmm.
And so like I immediately was like, all right, I got to do that. That makes sense. Like all the science, and plus that it was all paid for. I got everything covered by financial aid, and just saw that as a huge blessing, like
Yeah.
I was freaking out. Like everybody's like, "How are you gonna afford to go back to school, Wayne?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I just know I got to do it." And it was easy, man. And that's how I knew it was right, because everything, like from the first, you know, person I talked to at MIU, it was just like she was like, "Oh yeah, you belong here. We're gonna get you in. Don't worry about it." Like,
Yeah.
and it was just home from there. And then I met my TM teacher, Andrew, which lived he lives at the time he lived 5 minutes from me, and now he lives 5 minutes from my old house in Powhatan. And like that wasn't like something like, he met me and decided to do that, right? He had already planned that out. And that's when it really hit me that like there's way too many synchronicities to let anybody like talk me out of this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For
And
sure.
so I just stayed on it and been getting killer grades. I got like a 3.6, like not too shabby, but like so I've really, just impressed with myself and proud of myself for that. And
Yeah.
I got a lot of family proud of me too, and that, I couldn't be here without them, and that's why like it's so important for me to make sense of this, because yeah, I could leave and go do this, on my own, right? Like we could leave my circle, figure out a way to, whatever. But part of my dharma is to help transcend my circle. It's
Mm-hmm.
not all
Mm-hmm.
about me. It's starting where I belong, and I couldn't, my conscience would eat me up if I like had to separate from my family, like couldn't happen. And so that's how I know like this is like finding a way to make sense to other people, because to me, I'm convinced, I don't need to go
Yeah.
to school to learn like, oh, did this really happen to you? Like, no, it's there's no convincing me that it didn't happen. So it's just, now it's about helping others deal with that. The people that love me, I owe it to them to like help them make sense out of it. Hopefully you can help a little bit with that.
Yeah, no doubt. That makes total sense. So at that experience you had in 2022, had you already been introduced to Dr. Stephen Greer's work, or like what was your stance at that time on the extraterrestrial phenomenon?
No, I hadn't, but my friend Matt, that was murdered, he and I played music together all of our, since we were 10 years old. And we Blink 182, that was our band, right?
Mm-hmm.
We knew like, 10 of their songs, whatever. And so like when Tom first went off, like we were looking at each other like, oh yeah, he's on to something, but he's
Yeah.
also like obviously just ruined the band, and then he went off and started Angels and Airwaves, and then like we're seeing this kind of like spiritual side pop up. So we were just like interested, but we never really, sat down and talked about these things, right? But like we could joke about it and know that we were on the same level. And like alien Jesus, for instance, that was one of our terms. But like, I like to say that like, you know, Tom DeLonge was probably the first person that got me into this. And then
Uh-huh.
after I got out of incarceration, I read a lot of books when I was in jail. And when I get out, I like start going to the book bins, and seeing like different books. And like I pick up a book, and it's about um what was it on? It was on like Mars attacks. It was just something like
Mm.
really off the wall, like, but it like triggered something in me. I'm like, what's going on here, And because it was about like these like Mars Martians that were like coming
Yeah.
and eating people,
I
whatever.
remember that movie. It was ridiculous.
And so like I, started like getting, kind of like curious about it. And Tom DeLonge, like Angels and Airways, I was listening to them a lot.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, saw some of the videos, and then I see like him, he wrote a book, and it was called Gods, Aliens, and War. And I read like a few chapters of that before this happened, so like that book really kind of opened up my, like, it convinced me that something else was going on, but I was still so confused, and there was still so much like lack of trust in the whole thing.
Uh-huh.
Like I didn't know what to believe, you know what I mean? But that definitely, like, I think triggered something in me to like
Mm-hmm.
make some sort of connection that led me to like that memory, of like, wait, something's here, but like what is it? But yeah, I think after that happened, and then I read into Greer stuff, like I found this huge difference, like, because there's one narrative that is kind of military based, and then there's the other narrative that's like kind of spiritual based, like,
Yeah.
does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so before, like, I was kind of in that military based like narrative, if anything, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
but after I did that prayer and had that experience and all of that, it was like, wait, this is spiritual, and then that's when I started trying to find like a place to go back to church, but I couldn't go back to the same places that didn't make sense. And
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, and then like the Vedic sciences is like spirituality and science put together.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that was what really, like, oh, this, like, you have the Darwinist materialism people, and then you have your, like, religious people, and they like constantly just like, no, it's this, no, it's that. And I'm like, what if it's both?
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, with that, for folks who maybe aren't as familiar with some of these topics, would you mind giving just a little bit of background on who is Stephen Greer, what is CE5, and how does that relate to Vedic science?
Sure. Well, Stephen Greer is, he went to Maharishi University of Management, and he followed Maharishi around, and he found that, like, um, consciousness, is the key to all of this. And the meditation, transcendental meditation that they teach at MIU, and that Maharishi started the movement, the transcendental meditation movement. He learned it through Guru Dev, if I
Mm-hmm.
recall, and so it's he was a physicist, and but he found that, like, nothing else mattered more than trying to get people to learn this meditation. And because that meditation gets you back to your most pure state, pure consciousness, and then you can act from that point in a spontaneous, right action way. um, and so, like, in order for humanity to really get to unity, we got to get back to our source, which is pure consciousness. Understand that, we can do that, without having to die, is pretty important. And to me, like, I didn't realize like that you could do that before meditation, like that's not something I thought was possible. So I think it's important for humanity to just realize that not everybody has to meditate. Um, but the ones that are called to do it, it's not going to hurt anybody. um, so anyway, I think, Dr. Greer uses TM as a way to get back to the source, which we connect with all beings, and if
Mm-hmm.
you have that calling to connect, like if your DNA or your soul or whatever is more connected to these beings, then what better way to figure out what you got to do than to go
Hmm.
to that
Hmm.
source?
Well said. Well said. And, just to add some technical context for the listeners as well, one of the things that I think we're discovering with the extraterrestrial and the UFO phenomenon, right, is that the way that they're able to travel galactically, right, interdimensionally, is via higher orders of consciousness, right? And the mainstream argument against why we haven't been visited by extraterrestrials is that because of the speed of light, we are restricted in how fast you can actually travel through the stars via space and time. But I think what we're now discovering is that at certain orders of very small magnitude but high dimensional or high energy frequency, the laws of time, space, and causality break down. And it's at those higher orders of consciousness that beings and craft of higher orders of consciousness are able to travel and transcend the limitations of space and time. So wild stuff, but that's I think what we're discovering as more and more comes out about what's really going on with the UFO, UAP, ET phenomenon.
Yeah, I mean, like back in the day, they used to say that you were hallucinating if you saw something like this. And what if like that's just a wrong terminology, but what if like it's more of like a manifestation, like entanglement, and
Mm-hmm.
so maybe it's not happening in this reality, but it's happening on a higher level.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they're calling it hallucination because it's not part of their normal reality. And sometimes that makes sense. And I'll let people roll with that if that makes them feel good. If it if they want to say that I was just hallucinating, I'm totally cool with that, because
Mm-hmm.
that might be the best word they got to describe how they feel.
Mm-hmm.
And but for me, we've learned better. We've learned that, like, hey, there's dimensions and there's higher states and there's, um on the quantum level, uh things happen very, very dynamically, and so it's like infinite power at the tiniest level, the smallest level.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've learned that through Vedic sciences, and it's if that's how it is, and that like we have infinite power at that level, we just have to tap into it. And what does
Mm-hmm.
that mean? Does that mean like we make devices that travel interdimensionally from star system to star system, or do we, do that internally and that's just as good? So I think it comes down to like what's your dharma. Some people might be flying around in, flying saucers. Some beings might just, visit you on a ethereal level,
Mm-hmm.
on
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
a another dimension. And that's what I feel like happens to me on a regular basis, and I think it's just a thought come to mind. I think it's time for me to start documenting these things, that way it's on, because I'm trying to just, you know, take it as it comes and
Yeah.
do my best. But the senior project hopefully will, help kickstart that. So,
Yeah. Talk some more about what you're planning on for your senior project.
yeah, when we went to Fairfield, we met with a local there who was a 5 year CE5 practitioner and very, very unifying feeling dude. He was just awesome. And he led the sessions, and we had, oh, Jordan and I had a session with him, and it it was like during that session I was asking, hey, is it okay if we start uh, documenting these things and filming and sensing and start, showing everybody around here. And it was like, to me, it was clear by the reactions and the interactions we were having in the sky that like they weren't hiding, from us, and they were showing their presence. So
Yeah.
to me, that was like, all right. because we face a lot of backlash when you talk about this. It's like 50-50. Some professors are all for it. Some are like, we got to keep it professional.
Right.
And so
Right. Can't
but
be
I
talking about
found that,
aliens.
yeah, I found that it was best to, I found it was best to like ask permission from who I see as like, the person I need to ask permission from. It's like if you
Yeah.
want to do business with a foreign nation, you don't just be like, "Hey, we're going to do this now. You cool with it?"
Yeah.
We have
Well, the
to.
CIA might, but yeah.
True that. So it's like, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pushback. There's a lot of corruption. So like, I have a family. Like, I can't do this if I live in a fear-based reality. I have to know the empowerment that comes with what I'm doing. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
know that these beings are all around. Like, I feel like my life has been saved multiple times, and maybe it's not fair. I don't believe it's fair, but it's like I feel that.
Yeah.
So, Greer says like, I'm more of a threat to them dead than I am alive. And that really stuck because I feel
Mhm.
that's like showing your power on an infinite level, and
Yeah.
I'm figuring it out while I'm alive, man.
Dude, I totally agree. It's funny you say that. You're talking about Sirius earlier, which I wanted to make sure to follow up on. And for me, like Arcturus is where I really resonate with, right? As home. And the Arcturians are known as like the guardians of the galaxy. And I find that myself, right? When I'm like, man, what if these people come after me for the things I'm saying or whatever? It's like, what, then I'll just figure out how to reincarnate out there and come back and be way more of a pain in their ass, like they're not gonna win. Good wins. We know the end of the story.
Yeah, Maharishi says it best. He says, once you reach the cosmic consciousness, you're unbounded, you're everywhere. And then
Hmm.
once you're unbounded and everywhere, where else can you go?
Hmm.
And that really reigns to me, and that's what I believe. That's what I learned growing up in Christian Sunday school is like
Yeah.
John 3:16, man. Like, so I find that like it's you can't you got to embrace it. My time might come tomorrow, and it might last another 100 years. I have no
Hmm.
idea, but at this level, I'm just locked into doing what I truly believe I am here on Earth to do,
Yep. Yep.
100%. And so, yeah, like I might face that situation, but also I do have like a sense of feeling protected because of the things that keep happening. It's like,
Yeah.
and my family is like, one of the biggest ones that where all the worry and concern comes from, is but it's I take me wherever I go, and if I'm there, then if I'm at my best, and I give them their best chance.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So you talked about the C5 that we did in Fairfield with Audie, and yeah, why don't you talk a little bit more about what is C5? What happened in those experiences? Anything that sticks out to you?
Sure. I mean, I think it's different to everybody, and like, I mean, Dr. Greer kind of coined that term with the app, but there, I think Jacques Vallée might have had it before him, and then he just kind of,
Added to it or something?
yeah, branded
Yeah.
it. But so you have Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, which is human initiated contact, and it goes all the way, to back to Close Encounters of the First Kind,
Hmm.
which I'm going to butcher that, but it's each step is different type of connection. So what is step one? If you help, I might remember the rest.
Yeah, give me a second. I can pull it up. First kind, defined as visual sightings of an unidentified object seemingly less than 500 feet away. Second kind, UFO event in which physical effect is alleged, can be a functioning of a vehicle or electronic device, animal reacting, physiological effects such as paralysis or heat and discomfort. Third in kind, encounters in which an animated creature is present. So humanoids, robots, humans who seem to be occupants or pilots of a UFO. The fourth kind is a UFO event in which witnesses experienced a transformation in their sense of reality, including abductions. And then the fifth kind, as you mentioned, coined by Dr. Greer, is a prototype hybrid project which has scientific research and diplomatic interspecies relations components.
Yeah, it sounds very technical and nailed it though. Yeah, I think the last one is the one that really brings it all together because that's like I believe that's what always is always going on. You know, it's because the human is there, the observer is there, so it wouldn't happen without the observer. So it's all of them are technically human initiated. You know, I mean, like it's like if a tree falls in the woods and nobody's there, does it still make a sound? You know what I mean?
That's a good point.
Tom DeLonge goes on about this, and it'll really it'll mess with your head. But I do believe that the like I've had contact with these beings all along, and that's
Yeah.
kind of what the download was. Is it was like, oh no, all those things that you were like, what the heck was that? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Well,
So,
and that's one of the trippier things for me with regards to non-locality, right? Is like the whole even idea of them being separate from you is itself an illusion.
mm, yeah, yeah, entanglement. Everything's entangled some way, right?
Yeah.
We all started from stardust, so we're all kind of like we made contact we've already made that contact, long, long time ago.
Yep.
But yeah, I
So,
think the key to CE5 is going back to that, source contact where everything
mhm.
is one, and TM and it's been a blessing. I really
Mhm.
don't know if I'd be able to do this without it. It's kind of
Yeah,
like that tool that I needed to learn how to use before I could do my trade. And I don't
definitely.
do it perfect. I don't, sometimes I don't even get it in a day, but my TM teacher, he says, take it easy. It's not you need to discipline yourself on your own terms. And, I have a lot of baggage coming with
Mhm.
me, man. Like a lot of damage to my physiology, and some of it's probably permanent, and some of it I'm fixing. Some of it's getting better. Some of it's getting worse. But I think the key is I'm being more aware. And
Mhm. Mhm.
that's what TM really, really like definitely gives you is more awareness. And I think anybody who's ever tried it for a good period of time will tell you that. Um,
Yeah.
it doesn't make sense to people looking outside looking in because it's like sometimes it seems like I'm losing my mind, but it's one of those things where it has to I have to kind of leave my old mind behind if I want to, grow up into this person that I want to be. I
Yeah.
have to transcend,
Mhm.
and maybe
Mhm.
it's more of taking with me in a transcended way than it is leaving it behind.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like my family, it's like of course I'm gonna wherever I go, I'm taking them with me, and if I'm transcending, then they probably won't have a choice. So that's I don't put all of that weight on me, but I say like that's what makes the struggle worth it, is
Mhm.
knowing
Mhm.
like that fulfillment. If you have two people working together and you're doing great, it feels good. If you have three people working together and you're doing great, it feels even better. And if you keep moving that up, man, you get a great feeling that just keeps growing and growing and growing. And that's the idea of radiance, like,
Mhm.
and the idea
Mhm.
of coherent spreading and being contagious. And sometimes I don't get that right away, but my dedication to it is what makes it, I think, obvious to people that really know me that I'm on a on a solid mission that's, good for me and my family.
Mm-hmm.
It's confusing. It doesn't make sense, but they can tell just by the vibration that I put off that, this is something that's good for me. Even though it may look painful, even though I'm struggling, even though I've gotten a lot of health issues and all of this stuff, it's making sense, I think, on that subtle level to them, because it's not about logically um understanding it. It's a feeling. That's where family's at strongest, right? It's like, how the family feels with each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you talked about star family, and I think part of what's probably so complicated and confusing about the extraterrestrial phenomenon is that, well, I think there certainly is a physical element to it. There is also a lot of frequential elements to it, right, and interdimensional elements to it. So it's a hard question to answer, but like, what do you think is actually going on?
Like I said, Tom, call him out, my friend today, he said it's an experimental petri dish.
Mm-hmm.
Earth is one of those things where it's like it's precious to them, and they want to figure out how to let consciousness expand, on its own, in the most natural way,
Mm-hmm.
but in ways that we should remember our purpose there. And if you believe in God, it's like, why would God put humans on Earth if a God did not have a goal of making that Earth into a more godly place?
Mm-hmm.
And so, in order to get there, I feel like we had to have help from higher intelligence, because
Mm-hmm.
we don't have it crap figured out. We don't know how to save worlds, like maybe another species has already done it, and maybe another species before them. And if you believe in infinity, then how else can it work?
Yeah.
So that's my point, and I think it's a spiritual, you know, um, and it's for each individual. It's and more than it is for the planet. I think we're all in this to for us to experience the expansion of consciousness, you know, through the physical realm, through the
Mm-hmm.
physiology. You get to feel it, and that just expands consciousness tenfold. It's got to, right? I guess I feel it has to, because if you have one being who's just, not learning anything, and they're not really evolving into a being who's getting more fulfillment, then there would be no purpose of life. But because fulfillment exists, because people say they are fulfilled and truly feel that and all this, then that means like that that gives us proof that fulfillment could be the purpose of life,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
versus us not having that at all. So I think it's for each individual, but also, it's universal balance, universal expansion. So I feel like the universe is in me sometimes, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that's kind of like the unity consciousness view, is where you feel like you are the whole universe. And so I think that's part of it, where like you're just supposed to experience wholeness in this form, because that expands consciousness. And it's maybe we don't have a choice. Maybe it's just we each just got to figure it out little by little until it's all like fulfillment. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe you leave that and come back, and that's the in and out breath, in and out breath of the universe, of its expansion, is that it's got to leave it to come back, to revolve, to keep going.
Yeah.
Just some rants, man. Yeah, I don't claim to know it all for sure, but that feels right.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's one of Maharishi's principles that really like stuck with me early on was that the purpose of life uh, is the expansion of happiness, and it's like it's so simple, and for whatever reason, it's so counterintuitive to what we're taught, but yet it makes so much sense, and I really believe that, and I think maybe in our modern world we've kind of conflated and confused pleasure for fulfillment, and
Mm.
that's maybe why we've been led so far astray. But I don't know, I'm just curious if you had any thoughts on all that.
Sure, yeah. I mean, break down the word happiness, and does it truly mean what people are saying it means, or does it truly mean the way is, did people use it like the way it was designed, and where does that word come from?
Hmm.
Well, go all the way back, and maybe we can do this, but go all the way back to where it was originated, and see if people are using that word correctly,
Mm-hmm.
and if you have a word better for pleasure that doesn't serve you anything other than ignorance, let me know. You know what I mean? Like, it's just you're ignoring the fact that that sort of pleasure is not a long-term pleasure, and it's actually going to cause you
Yeah.
harm.
Yeah.
We don't know that in the moment, but
Hmm.
that's I believe that's why, like, happiness is one of those words that, like, how can I make you happy? Well, that's a loaded question because I can only make me happy.
Hmm.
So if you're using it, like throwing it at people and saying that, like, oh, they're not happy, I think it can be misconstrued as something that's like you said, just short term pleasure.
Hmm.
But I think Maharishi uses it as like fulfillment, I mean, fulfillment, and like a happiness with longevity.
Hmm. Yep. Yep. I think that's a good way to put it. So Wayne, you were talking earlier about the experience you had when you were incarcerated, and would love if you would just expand on what that experience was like for you.
Sure, I went to multiple different jails there for about 12 months, and spent my most time at a place called Piedmont Regional Jail in Farmville. And the most impacting experience I had in there was coming face to face with the same person who murdered my best friend,
Hmm.
and then having the jail it felt intentionally. They neglected the fact that we had to keep separate, a like we were not supposed to be in the same place, and it happened twice. And the second time was 2 weeks before I was about to get out. And if I didn't have some sort of spiritual background, like if my parents didn't raise me right, man, I wouldn't have survived in that place. And on the flip side, like if I didn't meet somebody totally outside of my comfort zone, and find like people to connect with that I normally wouldn't have connected with, I probably wouldn't have made it either. And I had a bunkie named Kirby who really just, like, I told him about the jail, doing this with the guy who killed Matt, put me in the same room, cell, and all, not cell, yeah, at the end it was, but in the same, it was the first dorm. And he just said, well, you come stay at my bunk, you can come stay in my cut. And I thought it was weird, like he was a trustee, so I was like, well, maybe this will work out. And yeah, we ended up hitting it off, and I was kind of like his eyes while he was gone. He had a stash of like food and all kinds of crap that I had to watch while he was gone, and then him and I, we picked who was coming in our cut and in and out, that really helped carry the whole experience because, I felt like I was connected to something bigger than just me. I felt like at least like I had somebody I could trust that like right off the bat that kind of was like, you know, I could feel he was a genuine person. And still to this day, I'm grateful, and times come up like, damn, he really saved my ass on that. And just he was really knowledgeable too, and very spiritual. He was a Christian and a Muslim, and I thought that was the craziest thing. But he had a Quran and a Bible, man, and he would read out of both of them, and he told me, how they're all kind of connected, and he was the first person to really like help me see, the truth in like all religions and like the um how each religion has similarities and
The perennial philosophy.
yeah, and he was like, yeah, it's just culture, man. It's all about culture. Like that's why it changes.
Mhm.
And I learned a lot about culture in there. And one of our bunkmates was um intersex. They were neither male nor female, but since they had some parts male but some parts female and not all parts female, they had to put them in the males because of that simple reason, and but they were not the normal not the normal male. And it was just wild because I learned that like people exist like that and they didn't have any sort of sex change or anything, and really tough life on this person. And um I think I'll save some of those details for another time, but um just wild experiences seeing like grown men and this person, do things that I would have never expected, and grown burly men too. And it just like it blew my mind, man, that's how, jail went down. A
What do
lot
you
of
mean? Like,
corruption in jail.
what's an example of that?
Like they would have a curtain and there was a section in the dorm and they would go slide the curtain and you'd see this big old burly dude walk in there, and we called it the she shed because their name was Wyatt. And they would go in there and do their thing, and Wyatt would come out with a bunch of shit like you know food or whatever, right? And that's how they made their money. And it was wild. And it just, I mean, people like in biker gangs, like supposed to be these big macho guys, and it made me think that like, the world is just crazy. So when I get out and people are all like, "Oh, this trans, blah blah blah," and I'm like, "Man, like, let me tell you something." And like they were awesome. I mean, great person, but crazy is crazy. Just, I mean, but they had a genuine, human heart. It wasn't like they were some sort of beastly creature, right? Like just because they were abnormal doesn't mean they were like, you know. I tried to like put myself in everybody's shoes, you know what I mean, and see that like, hey, they just making their money the best way they can. I don't, I don't, damn it. Yeah, man, wild shit.
That's insane. Was it difficult being in the same jail and then same block and cell as the guy who had killed your best friend?
It was super difficult because he didn't know who I was, and but I got to tell him, and right before it's like we were stuck in a cell, and I was just keeping it quiet, but I knew who he was. He was just pacing back and forth and saying a bunch of stupid stuff, like it had nothing to do with me or Matt or whatever. I forget what he was saying, And I was holding and shaking. And as soon as they popped the door, because I guess one of us was getting out to get a phone call, and they the guards opened the door, and that's when I turned around. I mean, I guess it was a bitch move because I didn't say anything when I was locked in the cell. But guess what? I'm also getting out in 2 weeks.
Mm.
You know, I'm not going to start a fight with the guy who killed my best friend and open that can of fucking worms. But I did. As soon as the guards, I used them. As soon as the guards opened the door, I turned around and I was like, "Hey, you know that guy that you killed? That was my best fucking friend, and you're a freaking." I said, "You're a fucking coward for murdering him in his sleep." And he was like, "Oh," and he just like looked at me like, "What?" He's like, and then he kept saying, "Well, what are you going to do about it?" I was like, "I'm getting out in 2 weeks and gonna go, enjoy myself." It's like you'll spend the rest of your life in prison, and I got to say that to him, and
That's awesome.
and that, I mean, I was spitting, salivating, whew. And the guards were like holding me back, and then I talked to my lawyer like right after that, and they're like, "Oh yeah, like COVID, you're getting out." I'm like, "What?" They're like, "Yeah, you're supposed to get out like in 3 months, but since they're trying to empty out the jails for COVID, we're getting you out in a couple weeks." I'm like, "Sweet, I'm out." And I just laid it low for 2 weeks. They
Yeah.
come, man. It felt like just one of the best feelings you'll ever get in your life is
Yeah.
if you go to jail and get out. And I immediately was just showed up to a world that felt like a ghost town. Everything's
Hmm.
closed and just, I don't know, man. It didn't really make sense. But like going back to like, meeting face to face with that guy who killed my best friend, like, how does that happen to somebody? How
Hmm.
does a jail like do that? And so I started feeling like the world's against me, and that's part of that where that desperation came from, that night back July 2022. Just like, how does that happen? Why am I supposed, why did I have to go through that? Because it doesn't make sense, but then again, maybe it does.
Hmm.
And maybe I had to make peace with that, like, and that was my opportunity that the universe gave me to make peace with it, and I did. Because I was like, screw you, I'm getting out. You're gonna spend the rest of your life in jail, in prison. And you know what the karma is, bro? He died 2 weeks after I got out in his cell.
Wow.
So, I mean, to me, it's like, the universe works itself out, but it still doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
But I see that,
Wild.
like, I see it made sense that why I didn't retaliate. I mean, dude, I was lifting weights all the time, dude. I
Hmm.
was 195. Like, I could have murdered this dude.
Yeah.
And he was skin and bones, like he probably still on meth in jail, but like
Yeah.
it just like I just had to, you know, and then wait for the perfect timing, get it out. And maybe I was a hypocrite. Maybe I'm the coward for waiting for the guards to, open the door. But guess what? I'm getting out in 2 weeks. You ain't about to make me spend the rest of my life in there with you.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
It's a wild story. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thanks for giving me an opportunity, man. A lot of people in my circle, they know that, and
Hmm.
but a lot of people that know me don't know that I had to go through that too, and I don't want pity, but it's just like that does some serious, like, makes you question things,
Hmm.
and so I appreciate the opportunity for clearing the air.
Yeah. Can I ask what you were incarcerated for?
Yeah, I was a heroin addict for a good little part of my 20s, and I ended up getting like back to back to back to back possession charges.
Mm.
And finally, they were like, "All right, you're gonna sit." in jail for a while. And the funny thing is, all my convictions was like 3 years, 3 years suspended, so like no time. But like the whole time I was in court in jail, I was waiting to go to court. But since I had like four different charges in three different counties, it just they were like, no, we're not letting we've let him out and he's gotten right back in. We're gonna hold on to him for a little bit, which probably saved my life in more ways than one. And like knowing that, hey, I'm in there when Matt was murdered, and I'm like, I couldn't make it to his funeral, you know, sucked. And I ended up getting out after, you know, his funeral and all of that. I get out and I go right back. I was out like 30 days, just didn't have life figured out, and it really using drugs made more sense than the reality I was trying to live in.
Mm-hmm.
So when that night, July 2022, I was at that desperate point where I'm like, that almost makes more sense. And I got a beautiful family, like, yeah, things were tough with some of the members and blah, blah, blah. But, you know, I, I didn't, that, I hate to say it, but it wasn't enough to like keep me going, and I was at that desperate spot of like, this doesn't make sense, like because of all of the trauma that I've made it through, I'm like, all right, it's got to lead something more than what I'm
Mm-hmm.
thinking,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
than what I've been thinking, because I don't think I'm made to do HVAC the rest of my life. I don't think I'm made to work for the man the rest of my life. I that doesn't make sense to me. Like I don't see. I respect people who want to do that and who have done it. But like for me, after everything I've been through, it doesn't make sense. It's like the only thing that makes sense to me is digging further to make sense of what's happened, and not even make sense, but just get comfortable with it so I can keep going.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Get comfortable with the trauma so I can keep going. Realize that like that just strengthened me for what I'm facing,
Mm-hmm.
because the fulfillment of getting through those challenges is something worth, struggling for. And it's been worth it, man. Like, I mean, this is really like one of, I feel like I'm getting towards the highlight of my life,
Mm-hmm.
and
Totally.
it's, yeah.
Yeah, man. I mean, that dark night of the soul. It's instrumental in the hero's journey. If you don't have adversity, you have no ability to overcome it.
Yeah, I wish I could handle adversity better in the moment, but like for everything I've been through, it makes it easy to handle it once I sit down and try to be grateful. It makes
Mm-hmm.
it easy, because like, damn, man, like, phew, I'm not in that anymore. I'm not going through withdrawals. I'm not struggling to find my next hit. I'm not sleeping in these places. I'm not homeless. And so it makes it super easy to be grateful after all these
Mm-hmm.
traumas. It's like I'm still living, I shouldn't be. I've overdosed a dozen times, been brought back to life, like by strangers and random coincidences. I should not be here. So, like, it's easy for me to be grateful when I try.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. And was it that 2022 close encounter that was what enabled you to eventually, just kick the habit altogether?
It did. I was using Suboxone. I was on like pretty much what they call maintenance. And I was taking 16 milligrams, which is a really high dose of Suboxone. I was taking Adderall and Klonopin all at the same
Mm-hmm.
time. And after that, they were like, it was like the ETs are like, that ain't shit compared to what we can do, or
Yeah.
like whatever.
That natural high.
They're
That
like, and you
spiritual
gotta,
high.
yeah, you want something, to live for. Like, here's a little taste. And dude, I rode that high for like 2 weeks, man. Like Megan was
Yeah.
gone for like a week after that, so like that whole week, man, I'm like digging and digging and posting and talking to different people and like, no, man, no, dude, like I'm not crazy. This happened, and they're like, so like, and then it got to the point where I'm like, oh God, people aren't ready for this. What what are you gonna do, Wayne? And then I was like, all right, you gotta go, you gotta figure it out. Like, I'm gonna go back to school.
Uh-huh. That's awesome, man. And I think it's Graham Hancock. I've heard talk about this idea of like people throughout history have used drugs as a way to try and like get to an altered state of conscious, right? And I think we have this innate understanding that there's more to the world than physical reality, right? And that altered states of consciousness or higher states of consciousness are instrumental in that. And I think, unfortunately, just the powers that be, the owners of the world, have manipulated that human desire and kind of detached us from that true spiritual realm of the
Mhm.
unseen, and kind of done what they can to push us towards the most damaging drugs that maybe give us a glimpse of that, but leave us physically in a much worse state after the fact.
Sure. I mean, like, what is the definition of a drug in your
Mhm.
opinion?
It's a good question. I mean, I always think about the line between like drug and medicine is dosage. And I think
Sure.
yeah, like
Well,
even
is food considered medicine, or
yeah, I
can
think
food can be
so.
considered a drug as well?
Yeah,
So that's where I find the line that like toxicity can be everywhere, and you
hmm
don't get you don't get away with living without consuming something. So I feel that if you have a calling, like imagine how they did it back, before they could Google, like, does this plant do this, or does this mushroom do this? Like, how did they figure out that it did that without killing themselves, just trying all these toxic things,
hmm
So my theory is that something, their connection to Earth had to have led them there.
yeah,
And and so imagine, like, how did all these native, indigenous tribes and stuff have their own means of medicine without being able to, like, do science experiments, like, and document it? And then there had to have
yeah,
been some form of like just knowingness, like, as and every and I'm sure, like, there's certain people that grew up knowing that they were meant to do that, right?
yeah,
So that's kind of how I look at this. Like, I've done all of these trials, figured out that, like, yeah, heroin works for some stuff, but if you do it all the time and do it like this, it don't work out for you too well. But guess what? If you get shot, with a bow and arrow, and you're trying to make it down the road to save your daughter, and somebody's like, here's some medicine. This will help you get down the road. I'm not going to be like, no, that ain't, like, I'm going to evaluate it based off of what's going on right then and there. I'm not
hmm
going to, like, you know what I'm saying?
yeah,
I'm not never going to say never, but there's certain things that I won't do, and that's go buy street drugs from somebody I've never met, like, because they're trying to make money off of me and they don't give two craps if I die, so who knows what's in it, versus like being in a hospital, and getting morphine because you need to chill out or your heart's going to explode. You know what I mean? Like, so it's
yeah,
just, I feel that there's a fine line between abuse and use.
yeah, totally.
Like, with psychedelics, there's a huge push to, like, abuse them in ways they were not, I feel like, designed to be used. And some people even use them to, like, torture other people.
Yeah,
So, but you can also use it to save somebody's life.
yeah, totally. So earlier you mentioned that Sirius is where you really resonated as home. I'd love to hear more about that. If you have any ideas as to why there seems to be such a important connection between Sirius and the human race.
For sure. So if you look in like all traditions, the Sirius star is considered like the hunter, and in some it's considered the dog star. And I've always, loved dogs. Like I can connect with any dog that, and I mean that, like every dog I've tried to like figure out, like I've developed a connection. Doesn't mean I'm gonna cuddle with it, you know what I mean? But like I can feel there's a genetic tie there or something.
Mhm.
And we grew up with hunting dogs and just always just cared, so deeply for these dogs, and like found like their purpose and everything, and how like important they were, to what we were trying to do, right? Like if our dogs went missing, oh, I guess we can't hunt, we can't do the drive now. And just always, my mom is huge on loving dogs, and we've
Mhm.
always had dogs. So I do think that that has something to do with it. And the reason why I'm almost convinced, or am convinced, is because like I'm a seeker, I'm a hunter in my own, and I feel that maybe these beings are like the hunter above me, like we are to the dogs.
Mhm.
And that kind of makes it makes sense if you see that we are evolving together. Like look at how dogs are evolving with us. They were wild, pack animals, and now they can be your best friend riding down the road, and lick you, right? Usually they're when sure they didn't always be like that, you know what I mean? So
Mhm.
I feel like maybe that's the connection. Like ET see us as like a bunch of wild dogs, and we gotta kind of be tamed to learn to be more than just primal beasts.
Mhm.
And I think that's part of my like purpose, is to help humanity realize that like we're in the middle between helping other species evolve and also species helping us evolve.
Yeah.
Because the ET thing is one thing, but like what about our duty to help others?
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's when it comes really down to the whole planet. Like, and I can see like if humanity stays on this track, like, and we like on the good track to the track to enlightenment, then maybe like all of these species that are on Earth will end up being like coherent enough to like understand the 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 common collective purpose that humanity is resonating. Like
Mhm.
once we reach that level one, um, level zero being where we are,
Mhm.
right? Like as
Mhm.
far as coherence and technologically and spiritually advanced, like we got to be both.
Mhm. Mhm. Yep. Got to be both.
And I think Sirius has like the ability to, because it's a two-star system. So it's like that's also, it stands out because our system is only one star, but
Right.
that's two. So they're like
It's
two
cool.
becoming one, and like maybe like each galaxy has their own like kind of Sirius, and maybe Sirius is a really just advanced. I'm
Yeah.
not trying to sound like Sirius is better than the Pleiades or any of that, but
No,
like,
but it's
it's
definitely very
like,
significant. It's in Orion's belt, right? Is that right?
yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, and if I remember correctly, you guys can probably see the Egyptian judgments scene behind me, but I believe that their view is that your soul actually passes through Sirius on the way to what's next.
Hey, yeah, that sounds right.
Hmm.
Audie was telling me about the Doggone tribe. Have you
Hmm.
ever heard of them?
Yeah.
And they have a huge connection to Sirius, and doggone's in the name,
Yeah.
and yeah. So I think like I don't know. It'd be interesting to see maybe like that's like a hub, or like
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard ideas that it's like that's like the navel, right? Like the genesis of our universe or our galaxy where all the other star systems are born.
hmm,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. Um
Yeah. Do you feel like talking about the your Egypt experience?
yeah, man, happy to.
Because I think that'd be good to tell the audience how we have to deal with some of these things as well.
Yeah, for sure. Are you referring to the download I had when I got back from Egypt?
Well, yeah, the guy trying to get you
Oh, yeah, I don't think I want to get into that yet publicly.
10-4.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think that we are that kind of it might end up being fear based for some people.
Yeah, for sure. But I appreciate you bringing that up. But on that note, there was something I wanted to ask you kind of towards that direction, right? And we've talked about a lot of Greer's work in terms of the CE5 protocols and establishing those peaceful relations between humanity and our star friends. But obviously, the other big part of his work over the last decades has been exposing the very human element to whatever is going on with the UFO ET phenomenon. That being that there's, I think, just an overabundance of evidence at this point that there are factions of the military and intelligence agencies who are very aware that this is a very real phenomenon and are covering up both their existence and their technologies. So I would love to get your thoughts on, do you agree with that? Where do you think things stand in terms of the whole push for disclosure?
Sure, yeah. I belong to Citizens for Disclosure, and
Mm,
um, that's our main goal is to push our representatives to give this attention and to make legislation to help our whistleblowers be protected, and also send law enforcement out to these illegal operations that from the evidence shows that they have technology that they're hiding illegally,
hmm
and using money illegally to fund the hiding of those technologies, like because that's just be real, like they didn't really buy the technology, you know what I mean? um like they knocked it down out of the sky is what the the word around town is that we humans are getting craft from other species by malicious actions. We are manipulating, uh, I guess, consciousness in a way, to get craft that other species have consciously created,
hmm
and to be to be in that position to do that, like you have to have malicious intent. So to me, like you got to spend a lot of money to hide that, right? But I don't think it's about the money. I think it's about the control, because if they can spin the narrative, then that affects the whole collective consciousness. Like if they can get people focusing on all these culture wars and nonsense, distractions, and then they can potentially like cause, destruction with war and weather modification, like direct energy weapons, like doing these things. And it's like the main question people have is like, well, if these ETs exist and they're good, then how are they letting that happen?
Yeah.
But it's not them letting it happen, it's us letting it happen.
Right.
Because if we get that to the collective awareness that we're not going to tolerate it, then it just doesn't exist. Like, I think if you believe in God, you have to believe in, like, God can do anything, right? Like, all powerful, almighty. So if we're all in line with what we know is God, what we know to be true is God, and like that's close to pure consciousness, it's universal mind. Like, if we're all one, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Then we all, like, none of that exists, because that's all like demonic, greed and materialism, like, at its worst. And so, like, we're feeding that by,
Yeah.
neglecting, like, oh wait, these things matter, these people matter, this matters. But we're like, no, this matters, this dumb thing matters, this nonsense matters, and you're dumb and you're stupid. And I think that's like the experimental petri dish. They're saying, like, oh gosh, we might have to add some stuff to keep this from exploding, because we care
Yeah.
about this experiment. So we might add this. And so they might stop this from happening. Like, oh no, we're not going to let that nuke go off, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. So do you think we're making progress on the disclosure front?
Yeah. And I think there's two different kinds of disclosure. Um, I think you got military disclosure, and then you have citizen disclosure.
Yeah.
And until we are at that level one, military disclosure matters more than citizen disclosure,
Mm-hmm.
in my view, because it's like there's certain things citizens don't know how they operate. We don't know how some of that military stuff works. And Lou Elizondo, bless his heart, he's like, if you are against a nation and you end up secretly putting troops in that nation and they don't know about it, but then all of a sudden somebody finds out that you got troops in there secretly and they tell that nation, immediately that nation's going to react hostily, if they think you're there trying to get them, right? So if military disclosure, if we, if everybody's just like, yep, it's all out in the bag, this is where everything is, this is what we've been doing, and that's going to cause that experiment to just go haywire. And I think it's very important to do that strategically for the sake of humanity, because you can have a couple wild eggs just freak out and they're in charge.
Yeah.
And unless there's some sort of coherence there to stop some crazy stuff from happening, it's going to be very easy for it to happen once people get to that level. Like,
Right. Right.
I think we have to do that strategically. But citizen disclosure matters. It without citizen disclosure, what is the purpose of military disclosure, right? So citizen disclosure would feed military disclosure and
Mm-hmm.
vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
But at
Mm-hmm.
the end of the day, like, what's more sensitive and what has to be more strategic is obviously the military disclosure. Like, you and I can go out
Mm-hmm.
in the middle of the field and practice communicating with star beings. And if one ends up coming where we're at in the middle of the field, it's really not going to throw off a whole lot of balance, because we're not in military bases. We're like, all this other crazy sensing and hairpin triggers are all around, right? So, like, essentially, like, people practicing CE5 in the military, they have to do that strategically. Like, whereas we don't have to do it as strategically. We can kind of be more natural and nonchalant about it. You know what I mean? Like versus if somebody in the military makes contact, then that could trigger this whole big, reaction from multiple different avenues that would
Yeah.
trigger this, trigger that. So I get that there has to be two different levels,
Yeah.
and maybe some people are in the middle between that, like Greer is obviously like
Hmm.
well versed in military action and operations, and
Yeah.
but he's also CE5, and he's like, oh yeah, just go out there and make contact, you're good. And Lou's like, hold on, I'm a military disclosure guy. I don't know if that's a good idea. Well, why not, Lou? Well, because what I just said, if the element of surprise could cause a reaction that is not sustainable or in that moment, or however you want to phrase it, it just cause too much imbalance that, can't happen the way a normal citizen would think it would happen.
Right. But I also get that, a big part of why Greer has focused on both tracks, to your point, is because there is a very real danger that if it's just military disclosure and that disclosure is being run by the same criminal factions that have been covering this up for decades, then they're going to do so to get us towards a fear-based paradigm where they can just start a war with these beings or something. So I understand that there's a lot of delicacies to the situation.
Yeah, that's why we need to get, more people on a coherent level.
Yeah.
And I get why, like, Maharishi was so gung ho about TM, because, like, dude, if TM is really the science, if once you see that, the science and all the data and stuff, and you see how, like, when it's implemented in military actions, you have a positive, coherent reaction, right? Like, that's documented, that's fact. And imagine if it didn't exist, man. Like, maybe that's what's keeping the ETs like, all right, like we have some coherence over here. Like, let's try to nurture that, like
Yeah, for sure. Um,
which I think would segue to the point that I was talking um the other week with you about, on how,
mhm.
like, why hasn't Maharishi, one of the most cosmic, teachers that we've seen on this earth, why isn't he speaking on this? And maybe Greer, decided that he thought the same thing and then took it upon himself to do it, right?
Yeah, yeah. I'd be curious to know, if Greer had tried to like first start the movement with Maharishi and in partnership with him, or if Greer was just kind of, because he's always been a bit of a maverick, so I could see him having just wanted to do it on his own anyway.
Well, he says that the meditation came. He said he had experience when he was a young child
Right.
and always kind of held on to it. But the meditation is what really brought him back to it. Is from what I believe. That's, don't hold me to that, but I think
That
that's what
makes
he
sense.
said. And which we could bring up, like, the allegations of him, marrying under a, what do you want to call, what would Mossad, what's the term to call Mossad? An organization. I'll just call them that, right?
Uh-huh.
Like, so there's a rumor going around that, oh, Greer is just all, he's a Mossad operative, he's compromised, and he's just been doing this crazy psyop on everybody from the get-go, since he was a teenager, right?
Mm.
So tell me how, from what you and I know, right, about Maharishi and all the stuff that where Greer went, and you know, I haven't seen any proof of it, but pretty adamant on, what he says, and he's got stuff to back it up that he says he does. So I have no reason not to believe him. And then all of a sudden you have one guy comes out like right before his new film's being dropped, right?
Uh-huh.
And says all this stuff, like, and maybe Greer leaves that gray area because, like, maybe it is something like where he has to, you know strategically play a part, play some role, like finagle, and maybe that has to do with working with somebody in Mossad. Obviously there's a connection there. They said it's on his marriage license that they got married in a place that was owned by Mossad.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever. So it's like you'll have a lot of that. I think those hit pieces come out at strategic times, if you've
For sure.
noticed.
For sure.
And it's like, oh, where was all this? Like when you first started talking bad about Greer.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and look, I'm very eyes wide open as it relates to how deep the influence and compromise of American, Israeli, Saudi intelligence, British intelligence has across the world. So like, I don't rule anything out of hand, but I've also like you followed a lot of what Greer's been saying quite closely and independently referenced a lot of it, and it has all checked out to me completely. And so like, I don't understand what benefit Mossad would be getting out of what he's doing now, and I see a lot of risk to them, at least the people in charge of Mossad. And again, like we were talking about the other day, I don't want to paint broad strokes. Same with the CIA, right? Like I don't think everyone that works in these organizations are bad. In fact, I think most of them are probably great people who care deeply about their country and about their fellow citizens. Just the leadership at the top and the way that they've been able to use the secrecy and the clandestine nature and the decentralized, compartmentalized nature of intelligence agencies to run all kinds of illegal criminal operations, including those which benefit from the use of the reverse engineered extraterrestrial technology. So that's how this stuff all ties together. So anyway, that's all to say. My gut says that I don't think he's Mossad, and nothing I've seen indicates that. But you can't trust none of these hosts, so it's good to always stay skeptical.
Yeah, I think it's good to say that, like, maybe Mossad has layers too, and like Danny Sheehan, he's
Mm-hmm.
part of the Jesuit order, and like there's many layers to that.
Yeah.
And Danny is obviously a genuine cosmic, good-hearted dude,
Mm-hmm.
and like I back Danny on everything. Like there's nothing, like, cuz he's just checked out every time.
Mm-hmm.
And people pick on him about his story, like that's his story. That's all the proof he's got. Like, just because he hasn't any more proof does not mean he's lying about it, and making it up. Could mean he's making it up, but Danny is such a, I don't know, he's proven himself to be that guy, like with the
Yeah.
iron. And so to me, he might be the glue in all of this
Mm-hmm.
because,
Mm-hmm.
he's also Lou Elizondo's attorney, and he's also, very close to Dr. Greer. They were just at the Boogosphere um, checkout thingy. Uh, so it's like, maybe we're seeing that veil between military disclosure and citizen disclosure thin,
Yeah, I agree with that too.
and maybe that's what the collective consciousness needs, and maybe people like Trump and Elon Musk, as much as I can't trust anything that either one of them say, maybe their role is to help bridge that gap. And
Yeah.
and that's how I make peace with it, man. Like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because a lot of it just doesn't make sense, and you have such a huge following and such a huge wave of that, and so all it would take is for one of them two to be like, oh yeah, this is what happened to me. I'm sharing it with you guys, and you know ETs are real. There's a ship in my backyard. Like, whatever it is, right? Like, maybe these people is what we need to we need to see them transcend, because that's where the collective is focused.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So don't we have to transcend the collective focus? Just like look what happened to Biden, man. Like all of that was exposed, and everybody's like, "Oh, it's obviously a shit show." Nobody can deny, even like Democrats themselves. They're like, "Oh yeah, we know, like we fudged that all up because look."
Yeah.
And so it's like that was a transcending moment for them. As much as like
Yeah.
conservatives bash like Democrats now, dude, like the majority have opened their eyes and they see it. Like
Yeah.
there's very few that I talk to that are still like going off of what Biden said. And so it's
Mhm.
like I think that's what we need. And this is a process. And part of the prize, man, is going with that ride, that transcendent ride.
Yeah.
We get to witness that
Mhm.
versus
Mhm.
it already being here, you
Mhm.
know?
Mhm.
So that's how I stay optimistic in it all, man. And that's how I stay like, knowing that the struggle is worth it, that even though things are scary, even though things still very confusing, even there's a lot of corruption. Like after that Whitney Webb interview, man, like
Mhm.
you you riding down the road just flicking off the courthouse, like just mad at the world, right? And it's just like because it's so much corruption and it's blatant. It's blatant and it's like obvious, but then nobody's doing anything about it. And it's like you realize it's just deep and deep and deep. And what Whitney and Glenn Beck said, man, they're like he asked Whitney, like, what do you do about it? Like besides this, like, and she's like, start with, start at home.
Yeah.
That's where it matters. And, that's really all you can do. She's like, I do this to support my home, but it's
Right.
really about home. And if you see the world as your home, then you just stretch that out. And
Mhm.
but it starts like start local, be vocal, and you're doing that great by having a podcast that's reaching so many different people and like such a diverse audience, and that's part of like seeing the beauty and bringing it all together. Like when I saw your podcast, I'm like, I've got to meet this guy
Mhm.
because like it was just so it's like felt entangled, but it was just like this is where it feels like I get optimism by listening to you and your guest, and it's because it's just you're not bashing people,
Mhm.
and you're not spreading doomsday like theories, and it's like that's what we need, and that's secure
Mhm.
in my
Mhm.
opinion. It's as easy as that, but
Yeah.
it's not as easy to stay in it.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate those kind words. And, that's one of the things I've tried to be intentional with this show, and especially covering organized crime, right? And a lot of the criminal elements that are prevalent in our society today. Like it can take a really dark turn. And a lot of folks that cover those topics, it is all just darkness. And, exposing the truth, it's critical for us to move past it, but it's just, one part of it, right? And I think what it's really on us in the present day moment is to figure out, okay, we've rejected the great reset. We've rejected the idea that all humans are going to be part of this one world government, hive mind, technocracy where we're all looking at our phones until we die, right? Like we don't want that. Okay, that's easy. But like what do we want? What is humanity's role in this world? Like how do we contribute positively to our planet and to our solar system and not be like the virus that the globalists try to make us think we are, but actually be beings of love and light who contribute in a harmonious and beautiful way to this universe. I think that's what's on us to figure out.
Yeah, and I think like spontaneous right action, like that
Mm-hmm.
is real to me. And because when nothing else makes sense, I go to that because it works. And if you're scared, you're wondering like, how do I connect with somebody? Well, guess what? You're naturally supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
So it should be easy if you just get all of this other crap out of your head, go
Mm-hmm.
natural, you know, and just like when they tell you when you're, going out on a date, like, oh, what do I do? Like, how do I impress this person? What do they say?
Yeah.
Just be yourself,
Mhm.
you know, just be natural, just be yourself. And people are losing that because they're like the media and is painting this picture of what you should be or like what you
Mhm.
can't be,
Mhm.
and you got to pick a side because you got to fight each other, you know.
Yeah.
But if you take that step, like, and really all Americans can agree on the Constitution, right? So we should be able to find common ground in that. And maybe some people don't agree with the Constitution, but I think as an American, it's your duty to agree with the Constitution. I'll just say that. I'll just say it outright, you know. But that's one thing that we can like politically say that this matters more than our party politics,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm. Definitely. So you had sent me a couple weeks ago a pretty cool report or academic article rather from some researchers in India who were looking into the ancient Vedic literature in terms of trying to understand extraterrestrial technologies, which I thought was super cool. And I think there's a lot to learn from the ancient world in that aspect. So I'd be curious to get your thoughts on all of that.
Yeah, I like when I first got to MIU, I'm like, all right, where's the connection here? Like, where's the talk about ETs and UFOs, like all that stuff? Like, I know it's in here. And the first thing that popped up was the Vimana, right? And they're like, oh yeah. And I'm like, holy crap, dude. Like, this is wild. You know, they were talking about this way back when. These things look like spaceships, and they're saying that
Mhm.
these actually existed, and like, wow. So I just started like, poking around, and it was funny because a lot of the people, you mentioned Vimana, and they start like, oh yeah, haha, yeah. And you're like, yeah, dude, like, what do you think? And they're like, oh yeah, that's good stories, yeah, great stuff. But then, you dig around, you find the Vedic scriptures full of, that kind of stuff, and you come to find out, like, why is it not talked about? Like, what
Mhm.
happened? And so that just led me down the road just searching, and I forget how I kept getting those, dude, but I get like one or two a day, and it's usually kind of all like the same stuff, but it's usually a
Mhm.
different writer that just, kind of does their own little take, but it goes wild. Like I think the translations like are a little bit off or something.
uh,
Have you noticed that?
I didn't, but that makes sense for sure.
Yeah. They're just wild because like I guess if you wanted to share something off of it, they talk about like different metals and how they can transition these metals into other metals, and how like the placement of certain objects create this field that makes the craft, move. And this is like ancient stuff, so it
Hmm.
it just blows my mind that like maybe like, it got suppressed, and maybe if you spend enough time on it, maybe you could get there, maybe
Yeah.
you could figure it out.
Yeah.
But it's like it's so wild that like as you're reading through it, you're like, there's no way, right? Like I'm reading like it's like you turning, it talks about some wild stuff. So you have to like really be in a higher state of consciousness to even accept it as truth, in my opinion. Like it if it is true, you have to be in that state, because otherwise it's just so out there.
Hmm.
Like so far beyond what our normal life is, and if you learn about the city program and like the depths of what that goes into, it's wild, levitation, right? Transportation, like these are some of the cities that are mentioned in the Vedas. So
Hmm. Hmm.
you look at like, all right, well, what happened there? Like the translations, right? you can always go back to the translations.
Mm-hmm.
And England comes over, to India. My theory is like they took a bunch of that stuff that the the ancient Vedic people were hiding, maybe sacredly just working on this, right? And maybe they took it, and that started like the cabal in a kind of
Totally.
way, you
Totally.
know.
I mean, that's what the Indiana Jones series is all about. And, obviously that's fiction, but they always show you what they're actually doing, right?
Yeah, it's just like the left hand, right hand thing,
Yeah.
They don't have to know what the other hand is doing.
Yep. Yep.
So if you like say that, then you really can't blame one country, Like I don't think England is responsible for the cabal. Don't get me
Right.
wrong, but like somebody that was working on that incursion, right, on the British invasion of India, maybe somebody like had a hunch because they were reading through other scriptures, and maybe like that's the real reason why India was invaded.
Yeah.
Because what? Yeah, I have no idea why, like, or what they claim British invaded India for, but to me, that would be a really good reason.
Yeah, for sure. But I totally agree. And I've heard theories that like a lot of what World War One and Two were really about was destroying a lot of evidence of ancient civilizations. Like you may have heard like the Tartarians and things like that.
Mm.
And you'll see that like there's still all these military bases right by all these sacred sites, and it's like what's really going on here, right? So I think it definitely all plays into our society's love of perpetual war.
Yeah, why? So
Now your
I
your
had
video
to,
is sideways, by the way, man.
I
There
had
you
to
go. There
do
you go.
I had to do a class. It was on systems, and part of the class was trying to figure out the systems of our world, from.
Hmm.
And anyway, long story short is I ended up making a reference to nonviolent wars. And the professor said it was oxymoron. I'm like, why? Why? Because he was like, well, because wars seem to be violent and wars seem to be brutal and destructive, and it violence is at its core. I'm like, yeah, but does it have to be? Like, he's like, what do you mean? I'm saying, well, like, what if we competed, you know, in ways that didn't do that? It's
Hmm.
just like,
Hmm.
what do you mean? Like the Olympics? I'm like, well, maybe, or like, economically, maybe we could compete and see, like, because isn't that what really establishes dominance? Isn't that why we have, why violent wars exist is because
Hmm.
somebody wants to dominate economically, or is it just, all about just blowing people up? It's like, no, they have a reason why they're doing that, right? And so, what if you just had ways that nations could work out their conflicts that didn't result? He's like, oh, well, now you're just, being very optimistic. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, that's what that's what the Age of Enlightenment should look like, right? I
Hmm.
mean, how do you think that we're going to stop having conflict? Do you think that we're going to stop clashing? It's like, no, we're not going to stop doing that. We're going to have to find better ways to get past that, to transcend that.
Hmm.
Like, we're going to have to find, we can't just be like, all right, well, I don't like you, you don't like me, so now we're going to fist fight.
Right.
No, it's like any reasonable person would say, all right, like, if we really want to figure this out, let me hear what you got to say and let's try it, right?
Yeah.
But for some reason, we don't get there. And I think you can say for some reason the elites don't get there
Hmm.
because they are not in a unified state of being. They're in a
Hmm.
fear based, they're greed based, And that's what controls the collective, it seems. It's like the media. So if you can transcend the media and then you can transcend that, then maybe you could transcend war. And maybe World War III is like, fought like in a way that doesn't kill people. I'm speaking crazy, but have you ever seen that movie? It's got Will Smith, and when he's a CIA agent and he turns into a pigeon.
I don't think so. That's wild.
And the guy like he's like the co-character in there. He's a gadget whiz, that works for the CIA, and he creates all of these gadgets that like are non-violent, and it's kind of like the base of the movie where he's got one that does like a truth serum and like it makes the person just act, like very empathetic and truthful, and like, other like he's got like slime that just traps people, for instance. So it's like obviously like that is, a very childish way to look at things, but maybe we have to get back to that, and maybe we have to get back to that playful, like, oh, it's okay, let's just do this. We don't have to fight about it. Like, but I still wanna, clash with you a little bit, and I can't let that go, or whatever it is, but like we're not gonna kill each other over it.
Right.
Maybe one day we'll see.
Yep. I think so. I think it's right. At the very least, if we don't talk about it, we're never going to achieve that goal. So I appreciate you putting those thoughts out there, man.
Yeah, that's the goal is peace, and maybe it doesn't look like we think it does, and maybe we got to transcend the way we think about peace.
Yep. Well, Wayne, this has been an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the show tonight, man.
Yeah, it's been a solid 2 hours.
Yeah. Do we cover everything? Was there anything you definitely wanted to touch on that we missed?
Yeah, man, I just think that meeting you in Fairfield and us doing the CE5 experience, that was a huge highlight of my life, and
Oh, yeah.
I hope we get to do that again. And I love for anybody who is near Fairfield or Powhatan, Virginia, to reach out, and let's make some contact. Let's connect.
Absolutely, Wayne. I had an amazing time with the C5 too, and we definitely need to do that again, and hopefully get you back on the show for an in-person interview at some time as well.
Yeah, man, I'd be stoked about that. Let's do it.
Hell yeah, man. Well, thanks again, and have a great rest of the night.
All right, Jordan, take care.
You too, brother.
Peace.
Vimanas, flying craft of ancient India. In this conversation, Wayne and I discussed Vimanas, the flying craft of antiquity prevalent throughout the Vedic scriptures of India. Eric von Daniken has been at the forefront of researching extraterrestrial influences on human civilization. In his series Beyond the Legend, von Daniken provides the history of Vimanas.
India is full of gods. There are hundreds of it, and most of them are related to the sky. They were descending from the sky. And all of these gods are linked to the extraterrestrials because they all were teachers. They all taught humans in mathematics, in calendars, and etc. For example, there is the almighty god Shiva. And Shiva had a flying machine, a flying bird. This flying bird was Garuda. And Garuda was flying around Shiva. Now Garuda was not the normal bird because Garuda even flew to the moon. Garuda was able to fly away from our solar system. Garuda also used bombs. Garuda were bringing his master Shiva to different places in our solar system, not only on Earth. So Garuda was a kind of spaceship, space vehicle, etc. Every Indian temple, if it is thousands of years old or if it's even constructed in our days, every Indian temple on the top has a Vimana. Now the Vimana, I said before, had different shapes, but on every top of an Indian temple, still today, you have a Vimana. Some of the Vimanas look like today's UFOs. They had the shape round or elliptic. Other Vimanas had another form. But still on top of the Indian temple is a Vimana. And the Vimana was one of the flying machines of the Hindu gods. Vimana is what we would call today a space shuttle. It's just a small space vehicle which moves between the planet and the mother spaceship in orbit. But with the Vimana itself, you don't make space travel from star to star. These diagrams are not extremely old. Some of these diagrams were created only in the 17th century. They are not thousands of years old in some of these Indian books. These designers who made these diagrams, they designed it out of the old text. They read the old text, and because of these texts, they made a design. Well, it must have looked like that and that. But the fact is there were different types of Vimanas which looked completely different, comparable to a helicopter and a jumbo jet. It's not the same thing, but both machines can fly. The idea of chariots of the gods has come in the Bible with the prophet Ezekiel. But the prophet Ezekiel, again, you can compare to Indian chariots. You know, what the Indian gods were flying in chariots. The chariots were always Vimanas. The chariots were always what we would call space vehicle, but not mother spaceships. The chariots only had a small distance. They could move in our solar system, but not to another star. These Indian descriptions about flying machines are not just fantasy, are not just allegories. No, they were real because the humans saw them and whole groups of humans saw them and then described what they saw. They described that one of the gods descended with the Vimana and the humans, hundreds of it, were watching them. They described that some of these Vimanas had wheels and others had no wheels. They described the noise which the Vimanas made. At least some of the Vimanas made noise. Others were quiet. So all this we have descriptions. Descriptions handed down and written by humans. Just read the book Dronaparva. It's full of these flying machines of ancient India. There is absolutely no doubt, no, for the one who knows it, that in India flying machines were described and different types of flying machines. And there is no doubt that there were mother spaceships, which were around the Earth in an orbit. The Vimanas were the small vehicles we would today call the Vimana space shuttles. You see, in orbit you have the mother spaceship. The old Indian called the mother spaceship cities in the sky, at least in the translation. Fighter is not the same thing as a private aircraft. We have different shapes in aircraft. The same thing happens in ancient India. All these Vimanas had different qualities, different speed, etc. Some of the Vimanas transported 20 humans out there. Others of the Vimanas had only room for 2 or 3 humans or gods. Some of the Vimanas had wheels. With the wheels they could land on Earth and they could move on Earth. Other Vimanas had no wheels. They could not land on Earth. They were always standing over the ground. There are differences in Vimanas. So the funny thing is, all this is Indian tradition. It's all in the Mahabharata. And on Earth, there are no industries to construct Vimanas. So the whole knowledge of the Vimana comes from outside. There is no technological evolution for the Vimanas on Earth. There is no report that some humans constructed Vimanas, that there was some sort of Vimana industry or an evolution in technology to create the Vimana. The Vimanas always came from the gods. And the gods again came in their mother spaceships, which the old Indian call cities in the sky. Every god who landed at some place, the place on earth became holy. And the humans were happy to be visited and taught by the gods. In honor of the gods, the humans made temples.
The idea that ancient Indians were visited by flying Vimanas is not an uncommon idea in India today. A quick DuckDuckGo search of Vimanas and academic article returns a wide variety of hits. Here are themes I found from a sample of articles with titles including Electronics and Technology Used in Ancient Indian Aeronautical Science, Mechanics in Ancient Aircraft and Ancient Aeronautics, Probable Technologies Behind the Vimanas Described in Ramayana, Research Case Study on the Technology of Rukma Vimana, Reverse Engineering Ancient Indian Vimanas, Rukma Vimanas Design and Analysis, High Technology in Ancient Sanskrit Manuscripts, and Vimanas Gravity-Defying Airship. Ancient Science. Advanced aeronautics is an ancient science. The Vedic writings on Vimanas originate with Maharishi Bharadwaja, the author of the Vimana Shastra, approximately 7,000 years ago. The Atlanteans, known as Aspans in the Indian writings, were apparently even more technologically advanced than the Indians. They possessed Viliksi, similar to Vimanas, that were generally cigar-shaped, and had the capability of maneuvering underwater as well as in the atmosphere and in outer space. Other flight vehicles were saucer-shaped and could travel submerged. It is recorded that between 12,000 to 15,000 years ago, nations deploying Vimanas in space with lethal weapons were locked in a global war that destroyed almost all of human life on planet Earth. The Yugas in Vimana Shastra mention that the first humans were able to fly themselves without any machines, the later humans started to face difficulties and had to use mantras, and the next humans faced even more difficulties and had to use machines. According to ancient astronaut theorists, Buddha had extraterrestrial contact from visitors to Earth via Vimana. When Ashoka was educated by Buddha, he had to hide this knowledge and keep it secret to avoid the world's destruction by evil people. There is a possibility that a planet with advanced technological beings influenced the apes on Earth by altering their DNA to make a hybrid species called humans. Vishnu avatars, as described in Sanskrit texts, are protecting the human race from evil. Anti-gravity. Faster than light travel is possible if you can generate a strong gravity field. If our government didn't confiscate thousands of patents a year under the name of national security, we would already have the anti-gravity machine in the public domain. The ancient aircraft could fly because they used a gravity neutralization system that makes it weigh 11% of its original weight. The aircraft has a circular plasma-filled accelerator ring called the magnetic field disruptor. The MFD generates a magnetic vortex field which disrupts or neutralizes the effects of gravity on mass within proximity. Different types of Vimanas. There are 4 main types of Vimanas with 113 subdivisions. First, the Sandara Vimana, type of jet plane. Second, the Rukma Vimana, a golden flying machine made up of ions and different ores and minerals. Third, the Tripura Vimana, a flying machine that can operate in both oceans and space. And fourth, the Shakuna Vimana. The form and function is similar to a bird with wings and a tail. Vimanas were kept in Vimana Griha, or hangar, and were said to be propelled by a yellowish-white liquid and were used for various purposes. The plain of Nazca in Peru is very famous for appearing from the high altitude to be a rather elaborate airfield. Consciousness-assisted technology. The Pushpaka Vimana, quote, moves about by thought power of its master. Pushpaka Vimana is described as the best of the best aerial cars, which is capable of traveling long distances. It is described as decorated with precious diamonds, gems, and corals with carvings of animals, birds, and flowers in gold and silver. Even though we don't know the exact technology behind this aircraft, recent research gives us an idea regarding probable technologies behind their construction. In 2013, researchers from the University of Minnesota designed a quadcopter, which takes off using a non-invasive motor imagery-based brain-computer interface. The researchers used a technique called electroencephalography to record the brainwaves. These recordings are then transmitted to the quadcopter via Wi-Fi to control it. Invisibility and sound technology. Aircraft was designed such that it could appear and disappear based on the wish of its master. Probable technology behind this could be reciting mantras. Generating a supernatural power might coat the aircraft with camouflaging materials, which makes the aircraft invisible. By means of the Vinarathaya Vikarana and other powers, the heart center of the solar mass attracts the force of the ethereal flow in the sky, producing a white cover which will make the Vimana invisible. Crystals were instrumental in extracting energy from the sun. By studying sunlight and types of sun rays, we can extract the power from the sun to make aircrafts invisible. Modern military aircraft use stealth technology and camouflaging techniques to achieve the same result. NASA has recorded the sacred Hindu Om sound from the sun's atmosphere. Ancient Sanskrit texts mention that the sun chants Om, and some texts describe that every atom bonds with another atom with the frequency sound of Om. Om. Free energy. Nikola Tesla was influenced by Swami Vivekananda and learnt Sanskrit terms from him to read the text. He tried to invent many things mentioned in ancient Indian technology texts. Some of his inventions are aerial transportation vehicles, which are similar to Rukma Vimanas and Tripura Vimanas. There are free energy motors and generators mentioned in Vimana Shastra. Tesla's work explains that excess electricity will lift an object, resulting in anti-gravity propulsion or levitation. Tesla also worked on free energy concepts with the help of ancient Sanskrit texts. Free energy concepts have been neglected and avoided by many countries, but a recent invention from India describes a free energy generator which generates more than 200% efficiency by taking power from the vacuum. Mercury. Pushpaka Vimanas used mercury as fuel, which is called Padma Rasam in Sanskrit. The difficulty we face today is that the text mentioned various metals and alloys of which we no longer know the translation. Mercury is a heavy white silver liquid. It comes from cinnabar and is named after the messenger of the gods in Roman mythology. It is liquid at ordinary temperatures and expands and contracts evenly when heated and cooled. Mercury in its vapor conducts electricity. Its vapor is also a source of heat for power usage. Mercury amplifies sound waves through which they do not lose timbre or quality. High-frequency sound waves produce bubbles in the liquid mercury with the frequency of bubbles grow to match that of sound waves. The bubbles implode, releasing a sudden burst of heat. A mercury-filled flywheel can be used for stabilization and propulsion in discoid aircraft/spacecraft. The mercury atom offers the most stable gyro device in nature and saves space and weight. This is particularly valuable on long-distance flights where all space and weight must be calculated and conserved. Nazi research and suppressed technology. Shivkar Babuji Talpady was a Sanskrit scholar who had read the Vimanaka Shastra. Talpady flew an unmanned flying saucer. It was an advanced Vedic mercury ion plasma, imploding and exploding vortex, noiseless flying machine which could move in all directions. The airplane flew nearly 200 meters high and was airborne for 18 minutes. After that, the Naksha Rasa accumulators ran out of energy. This feat was witnessed by more than 3,000 people, including British, at Chowpatty Beach in 1895, 8 years before the Wright brothers. Instead of praising him, the British rulers threatened him and treated him terribly. The German Rothschild owners of the British East India Company, who ruled India, did a frantic search all over India for Sanskrit texts and took them away to Germany. All these texts are still missing. Talpady's technology is now used by NASA, solar-powered 7-stage mercury ion, superconductive plasma anti-gravity vortex. With the help of the Vedic text taken to Germany by Hermann Gundert, the ion engine was demonstrated by German-born NASA scientist Ernst Stullinger. Hitler had these translated Sanskrit texts. This is why he made the swastika his symbol, as it was the symbol of the Saraswati civilization which existed from 9,500 BC to 4000 BC. Many Sanskrit scholars, Kashmiri Pandits, were kidnapped and they were never heard of again. Before World War II, Hitler and his team worked on ancient texts, including Indian Sanskrit texts. Nuclear weapons, the Mercury vortex engine, and the bell-shaped flying object named Daiglok are all similar to ancient Indian technology. I found the connection between Vimanas and Nazi scientists to be particularly interesting, as I believe the Germans' secret space program in World War II serves as the bridge between the Vimanas of antiquity and the Vimanas of present day. Present-day Vimanas, including the one disclosed by the New York Times on December 18th, 2017. Nazis and the secret space program. High jump, paperclip, and overcast. Are these present-day Vimanas piloted by extraterrestrials? Could they be man-made, reverse-engineered craft? To answer those questions, let's explore clips from the Gaia series, Deep Space.
Hitler developed the Nazi belt, or the Die Glocke, and what he did was he sent his soldiers all around the world, including as far as Tibet, to get ancient records and information on how to develop this ancient technology. He even utilized Maria Orsic, who was a member of the Vril Society, to channel information on how to develop this technology under the order of the Black Sun.
When Rudolf Hess witnessed Maria Orsic as she channeled his deceased friend Dietrich Eckart, he became convinced that she was the real deal. Rudolf Hess had served time in prison with Adolf Hitler, and they knew each other well. It's presumed that it was Hess who told Hitler about Maria Orsic, her channeling sessions with the light beings of Aldebaran, and most importantly, her flying discs. Famed scientist Winifred Schumann recognized that the flying saucer plans, channeled by Maria, closely resembled the work of Austrian scientist Victor Schauberger. It was just after Hess revealed what Maria Orsic was really up to that the Germans essentially kidnapped Schauberger and put him to work on the German flying saucers. But who was Victor Schauberger, and what did he discover?
Victor Schauberger was an Austrian inventor who worked actually during World War II with the Third Reich. And he's well known for his vortex mechanics. And he worked a lot with water vortexes. He was early on very interested in the way water purified itself in streams through natural swirling and whirlpools and things. And so the whole idea of what we would call vortex technology, and in a sense using water in this case, was really pioneered by Victor Schauberger.
Victor Schauberger created an amazing vortex technology. He actually analyzed and studied fish in a stream. He noticed that trout were able to stand still in a moving stream because of the vortex of the water flow over their body. He analyzed the same exact thing in salmon who were swimming upstream. This vortex flow of water over the fish's body gave him the concept and idea to create a vortex-based technology that was fundamentally based off of pulling instead of pushing. So his actual technology would allow you to be pulled through space instead of pushing against space. Victor Schauberger's egg-shaped vortex-based engine became critically acclaimed. Eventually, a corporate conglomerate kidnapped him, brought him to another country, forced him to sign over the rights to his invention in order for him to get back to his family. When they did release him back to his family, he was found dead 5 days later.
Victor Schauberger is a physicist who created a device called a repulsine, which used vortex generation to actually create lift and maneuverability of disc-shaped objects. The interesting thing about his techniques is that Schauberger actually believed that we were doing things wrong in physics. He said that birds did not fly, they were flown, and fish did not swim, they were swum. So all you really had to do was tap into the forces that existed in the ether around us, and you could actually generate movement and theoretical performance like a flying saucer.
Schauberger invented a number of unusual items and devices, including a flying saucer kind of device that worked as a vortex, sort of flying tornado vortex similar to a gyro also. It's curious with Schauberger's devices in that it's quite possible that an aircraft, particularly a flying saucer kind of aircraft, could actually be powered by water as the vortex.
The issue regarding the Nazis and their flying saucer research is there is a basis in fact here. You know, we all know now that there were certain German scientists during World War II, I think most prominently Victor Schauberger, who were doing very interesting, let's say brilliant, let's say even genius level work on disc-shaped airframes. Schauberger was a self-taught genius who was then commandeered by the SS to work for them during the war. He did create disc-shaped craft. They were tested.
The question is, were aliens helping the Germans develop technology? And the fact is the Germans are very bright guys. You know, there's the old joke that heaven is where the mechanics are German. You know, hell is where the police are German. The Germans were brilliant, absolutely brilliant engineers. And it looks like there's a trace all the way back to 18th century Prussia, where they were working on and interested in developing technologies, airship technologies, and anti-gravity technologies. So I don't think that the aliens are required for the Germans to have achieved the things that they achieved technologically. It wouldn't hurt. And there's also the fact that you have people like Hermann Oberth, who was actually the mentor of Dr. Werner von Braun. The physicist behind von Braun's engineering said we had help from people from other worlds.
In my mind, you have a similar thing with Victor Schauberger as with the ancient Hindu texts on Vimanas, which talk about Mercury being part of the power system of these ancient craft. And supposedly using Mercury would be also in a kind of a Schauberger type vortex, but you'd be using Mercury instead of water. And Mercury has many unusual qualities. It's an element, it's a metal, it's a liquid, it's a conductor. You can do things with Mercury that you can't really do with any other metal or liquid or element, really. And that would be creating things like Mercury gyros. And a Mercury gyro would then be a sealed gyro with Mercury inside it, moving as a liquid in a vortex or a gyroscopic kind of action. And then if you were to introduce electricity into that gyro of Mercury, you would electrify that Mercury and it would become a plasma, an electrified gas that's spinning in a toroidal or gyroscopic type movement. And scientists have used gyroscopes for years as an example of artificial gravity and anti-gravity. So in a sense, a craft that's using this kind of vortex technology, especially one with Mercury, is a very viable kind of flying saucer type craft. And the other interesting thing about such a craft like that is that once you introduced electricity to the Mercury vortex, it's going to light it up. And the thing will be extremely bright. So if you were to see this thing flying, it would be much as many UFOs are described, where they are this spinning top kind of gyro thing that's also very brightly lit, sometimes with even lights that are flashing or flickering or spinning along the edge of the craft. And this is exactly how a Mercury gyro would really look like and act like.
Well, the Germans were mounting expeditions all over the world in the 1930s because they were looking primarily for mystical devices. You know, their technology was very, very advanced. Their aviation technology was way beyond anything the United States developed.
The ancients were fascinated with Mercury all over the world. The Chinese and the ancient Mexicans and Mayans and Mercury is usually an offshoot of gold production, actually. But yeah, when you have the ancient texts, like the Vimana texts, Mercury is clearly talked about there. So Mercury was a very important thing for the ancient people. But Mercury is a deadly poison. Working with Mercury, you shouldn't do that. Mercury gas is completely deadly. Mercury needs to be handled very, very carefully and in a closed environment. So exactly what ancient people were doing with Mercury is kind of a mystery, although spacecraft and stuff is really the obvious thing to do with it, and other mining technologies. Mercury really comes from a mineral called cinnabar, and cinnabar is a Sanskrit word. So even geologically and mineralogically, words for Mercury and cinnabar come really from ancient Sanskrit. Mercury, too, in Western tradition, Mercury was the Greek god of communication. He flew through the air. And so with the ancient people, it would seem that Mercury and flight are very carefully associated with each other.
Using Schauberger's vortex technology, the Germans perfected the device they called the bell. What other research were the Germans doing during this period of time?
I like to put it this way. If you stop and think of the modern American or Western military arsenal, stealth aircraft, guided missiles, heat-seeking guided missiles, acoustic homing missiles, lasers, fiber optic communication, telephony by optical communication rather than radio waves, fuel air bombs, thermobaric bombs, particle beams, directed energy weapons. We could go on and on and on. Well, the bottom line is that if you look at the Nazi arsenal as it stood at the conclusion of World War II in Europe, what you have is basically an inventory, or a catalog, if you will, of all of the weapons systems that we now take for granted in their Generation 1 prototypical form.
So, what was the Nazi bell? And how did it work?
In 1995, a large group of documents were discovered in Poland, which tell a very interesting story about a fascinating object called the bell.
The bell is an interesting story that has come out. It's one of those stories, incidentally, that's come out since the German Wiedervereinigung, the German reunification. It's a story that, in my opinion, lies at the very center of the Nazi UFO myth, this idea that the Nazis had field propulsion flying saucers and, they took secret trips to the moon and Mars and what have you.
The bell's a propulsion system. It's basically a kind of reactor, and that reactor is the power source for a thing called a Haunebu.
This SS Obergruppenführer, his name was Jakob Sporenberg, and he was tried by a Polish war crimes court after the war for the crime of having murdered 60 Germans that were part of this project in order to keep it secret. And in his affidavit before the Polish War Crimes Court, he describes details of this project called Die Glocke, the bell. He describes a device that's bell-shaped. It's about 12 to 15 feet high, if I remember, and it's about 12, maybe 12 feet wide. It's bell-shaped. It's described in terms that make you think it's either a ceramic cover or a ceramic metal. It's cryogenically cooled, either with liquid helium or liquid oxygen, something that's going to super cool it. And on the inside of this device, there are two rotating cylinders. Sporenberg describes that they poured into these counter-rotating cylinders a substance called serum 525, which was described in the affidavit supposedly as a very heavy, dense, viscous, gooey metal that was a deep maroon or cherry red color. There were enough details that you could sit down and kind of reverse engineer the thinking, the physics thinking that the Germans may have been employing in this device.
We've heard from a number of experts about the Germans and their technology, and the documentation coming forward shows that they were using a red mercury. Now, red mercury is very interesting because when you put it into a torus energy field and get it up to about 60,000 RPMs with an atmospheric pressure of 250,000 and apply an electromagnetic field, you get anti-gravity properties.
So this Serum 525 is put into these counter-rotating cylinders, and they're spun up, to high speed and in opposite directions. And what this is going to do, just to explain a bit of the physics for a moment, it's going to cohere the rotation of the atoms and molecules of this substance on one plane. Okay, so in other words, it's going to align the axis of rotation of these things. Sporenberg also describes that it makes a buzzing sound or a hissing sound. So the Germans actually nicknamed this device Der Bienenstock, the beehive, because it's buzzing, it's making this buzz. We have indications that the Germans are experimenting with some substance that is being zapped with lots of electricity. And right there, that tells me plasma. The substance is heavy, it's liquid, and it's red. So that tells me it's probably metallic. It's probably an oxide of mercury and, something else in chemical compound. So what they're creating, in effect, is a version of the sun. Because the sun's a plasma, it's under electromagnetic stress, you've got the differential rotation of the plasma, and that's going to create what physicists call torsion. I think that the Bell device is a device designed by mimicking the sun to create a maximum torsion shear effect. And as a result, it's going to create a kind of magnetic bubble or cancellation of the gravitational field. And in fact, this is what is reported of the Bell, because the concentration camp victims who apparently saw this being tested at night on the surface saw something that looked like a barrel glowing a pale blue, rising, kind of levitating and then falling back down below the tree line.
The Haunebu is your classic UFO. Looks like a UFO that you've seen in 1,000 magazines. So they developed the Haunebu around the Bell, and they had to shield the Haunebu because the Bell gives off so much radiation and heat and a lot of other things.
So then what happened to all of this advanced German aerospace technology after World War II? And what were Operations High Jump, Paperclip, and Overcast?
After the war, it's generally believed that the Germans took their research from Nazi Germany to Norway, and eventually from Norway to Argentina, and eventually from Argentina to Antarctica, where they had secret bases in New Schwabenland. The Germans had the technology, but they didn't have the resources, and that was the big problem. They ultimately lacked oil. Germany does not have a lot of oil. They needed oil. They needed electricity, they needed generating plants, they needed to have the facilities to manufacture the weapons. So even though they were very much ahead of us in terms of theoretical research, they were only at the very end of the war beginning to take some of these theoretical super weapons and actually mechanize them, engineer them into reality. Had the war gone on another year, we would have lost it. The Haunebu saucers should have been capable of going almost anywhere. I mean, the fact is that the Bell would generate not only a lifting capability and an anti-gravity effect, it would also tend to generate a protective field, almost a force field around the craft that would make it impervious to conventional weapons and would also enable you to fly in space and not have to worry about things like radiation and all the different hazards. Meteors would bounce right off the shield. So it makes a lot of sense that they would have been able to actually go to the moon as far back as the 1940s with this technology. All you do is you just keep going up. You just keep moving in one direction, and pretty soon you're in space, and then you just point at the moon and go there.
Supposedly World War II ended with the Allies really entering Berlin in 1945. But really World War II didn't end there. And what apparently happened was the Germans of the Third Reich had created a number of isolated and forward bases around the world, using particularly their U-boat fleet, but also with other commercial ships and aircraft as well. And they already, towards the end of the war, apparently had begun building flying saucer type craft. And there's also the famous Foo Fighters that were seen at the end of the war over Germany. And while some researchers seem to think that Foo Fighters were some kind of extraterrestrial observation craft, just watching the end of World War II or something, other researchers believe that the Germans had really created the Foo Fighters and that they were really sort of a high-tech, last-ditch effort by the Germans to stop the bombing raids, and that this really the carpet bombing of the industrial cities in Germany. With the end of the World War II, the Germans were really escaping, and with their vast U-boat fleet, to places in Greenland and the Canary Islands, to South America, also going to Indonesia and Japan, and incredibly to Antarctica, where the Germans had started to create certain bases, underground, undersea U-boat bases in an area that they called New Schwabenland, and which we today call Queen Maud Land. What the Allies seemed to finally realize, particularly after 2 U-boats surrendered after the war in Argentina, they realized that the Germans had a fleet of black U-boats, and that there was a large number of U-boats that were completely unaccounted for at the end of the war. And 2 surrendered in Argentina some months after the war. And both the British and American military forces, they took the captains and the crew of these U-boats, prisoners, and interrogated them for months of where they had been all this time after the war, what kind of passengers and cargo they had been carrying. And in fact, some of these U-boats were apparently carrying huge cargoes of mercury, which is a very strange thing. And it's looking into all that over time, I found that there was a U-boat that had been wrecked in Indonesia during the war, and its cargo was mercury. And then, only a few years ago, it was in Norwegian papers that a U-boat had been found sunken in a fjord in Norway, and it had been sunken in like 1944 or 1945. And the interesting part of that story was that the Norwegian authorities were worried that this sunken U-boat would fracture and crack, and that its cargo of mercury would leak into this fjord and poison it. So here again, you have one of these strange missing U-boats with a cargo of mercury. Then the Allies realized that there was something more going on, that parts of the Third Reich were still active, and that they were active particularly in South America and Antarctica.
So the rat lines were through Switzerland, through Marco, Spain, and through the Vatican. And that's where all the SS officers kind of went and were allowed to change their identity and then, take on other lives in other places. Obviously, there were a lot of people that came to the United States and Canada, Operation Paperclip, and then even some went to Russia. A lot were allowed to stay in Germany and actually carry on.
Even though the Allies won World War II, there were nagging suspicions that something was wrong. Under intense questioning by the Allies, it became apparent that the Germans had built a secret base in Antarctica. Rumors were spreading that the Germans had developed special weapons, which were being kept near the South Pole. Admiral Richard Byrd was assigned the task of finding out what was going on.
Some strange things happened during Operation High Jump, and allegedly craft flew out from the aircraft carriers over Antarctica, and they were involved in some kind of aerial combat with flying saucers. And the flying saucers defeated the American Navy. And they left after 3 months. Operation High Jump came to an end, and the Americans left Antarctica.
But I think the crux came in early 1947 with Operation High Jump, where Admiral Byrd, a whole military expedition, goes down to Antarctica, where the Nazis had made it very plain that they had built a huge base down there, sometimes referred to as Agartha, and that they had located underground lakes of warm water, and that they had these caverns they were operating out of. And of course, we don't know for certain if any of that's true. What we know for certain is Admiral Byrd, Operation High Jump, goes down there all equipped with troops, airplanes. I mean, it was a military expedition. and they were set to operate for 9 months. Well, after about 3 months, they came back with their tail between their legs after having suffered casualties, all kind of problems.
They sent this massive task force, including an aircraft carrier, tons of aircraft, a couple of destroyers, to Antarctica. They set up a base, and then basically what they did, if you look at it, is their exploration pattern was from the base, which was at one end of Antarctica, around to New Schwabenland, where the rumors are that there actually was a confrontation with Nazi flying saucers who devastated the American army. They packed the whole thing up and ran back to the United States. And later on, Admiral Byrd was quoted as saying basically that there are spacecraft or aircraft that are so fast and so maneuverable and so powerful that they are going to come at us from all different directions from the poles, and we are not going to be able to defend against them. So clearly, Byrd is talking about what he saw in Antarctica in the battle that took place there in 1946.
And Admiral Byrd then stopped in Santiago, Chile, on his way back to the United States. And he had a press conference in Santiago where he said a bunch of bizarre comments and talking about, a whole new enemy, a whole new technology, and that they were capable of flying, that these craft could fly from pole to pole, is what Byrd said. And this is where some of the stories of the Hollow Earth started to come out, and strange stories that were promoted in magazines in the 1950s of UFOs in Antarctica, holes in the poles, and that Antarctica was some very special place within the UFO scene.
They actually brought a whole army there to snuff out whatever was left over, and they got their asses kicked and they came home, and I think Admiral Byrd was very upset. I don't think maybe he thought he wasn't adequately prepared, and I think they killed him just because he was raising hell about that.
And Admiral Byrd in the South American newspapers was quoted as saying, in the next war, we'll be facing craft that can fly from pole to pole in a matter of minutes. I think they encountered the Nazi UFOs.
Between Operation High Jump, which supposedly encountered Nazi UFOs, and the crash at Roswell, which possibly could have been alien, between those two events, they seem to really fire things up and begin the creation of what we now call the national security state. The CIA was formed actually in 1947. The NSA was formed in the early 1950s. All of these events seem to be connected. The biggest event was the 1952 buzzing of Washington, D.C., and after that is when all of these agencies like DARPA came into existence, the Defense Advanced Resources Projects Agency. All of these different organizations came into being and started to work together and started to deal with this question of what were these flying saucer-like objects that were actually swarming all over the country at the time. So I think there was a definite connection between that military catastrophe in Antarctica, Kenneth Arnold's sighting, the Roswell crash, the 1952 buzzing of Washington. I think it created panic at the highest levels of government, and that's when the whole national security state came into existence.
When Secretary of Defense James Forrestal visited Germany just after the war, he and others discovered the unusual technologies that the Germans had been working on. It was at this time that the upper levels of the United States military began to contemplate the unthinkable.
Project Paperclip, to me, is the point at which we made a deal with the devil. We sacrificed our soul for security. There was no reason we had to take on the paperclip scientists. You know, we had their documentation. We interrogated them. We interrogated Werner von Braun in Germany, Dornberger, all those guys. We had a lot of their documents. We found enormous caches of records and spare parts for aircraft and rockets and the V-2s. All of this we found. There was no need, really, to bring them all to the U.S. and make them citizens and basically replace the scientists that we had. Something was very fishy about that. And to this day, I think that that's the point where we just crossed the line.
When we first discovered Project Paperclip, when I was back working for the Jesuit National Headquarters in Washington, D.C., we realized that the United States, at the very end of the Second World War, engaged in a very aggressive program to commandeer the German scientists that were working on the rocket program, the V2 program in the United States, really got much the better of the Soviet Union in that contest to try to commandeer these scientists, to try to get access to that military technology so the United States could use it to their advantage. And Project Paperclip was the code name for the actual effort to recruit these scientists. Well, recruit them, either threaten to put them in prison as war criminals or get them to come and work for us. And they, not surprisingly, chose the latter.
Truman, as president, ordered the Pentagon not to bring in Nazis into this program. He says, if these people have any kind of suspect backgrounds, we don't want them. I don't care what the value is. And the Pentagon basically ignored him completely. They doctored records. They changed things. They brought these guys in. Some of them were really vile. One or two we had to send back. They were that vile because people found out. But most of them had, they were problematic. And Paperclip we were doing because we were afraid the Soviets would get a hold of these scientists and they would get the technology. We wanted it first. So we're scrambling through Europe to get to all the documents and the personnel before the Soviets. And the Germans were more than happy to not be captured by the Soviets and be captured by the British or the Americans. So they were running in our direction anyway. Werner von Braun particularly. I mean, he was an opportunist from the word go. So all of these guys were running towards the American embrace and willing to just sign off on anything according to what we've learned. The Soviets were making the same kind of push, and they did get some scientists, and they got some of that, and it did help them with their programs. So Paperclip, though, started with, when I first started researching it, maybe 100 to 200, maybe 300 scientists. Now we know it was more than 1,000, pushing 2,000, maybe more. And that's just the ones we brought into the continental United States. That's not the ones we helped to escape to other parts of the world and set up one way or the other and protected. So we had Nazi war criminals everywhere, and the scientists were particularly valuable. And we had, Otto Skorzeny, who was the famous Nazi commando, running an operation in Egypt composed of German rocket scientists, developing rocket technology for Egypt. So this was going on at a tremendous clip, and we couldn't trust these guys, and we had reasons not to trust them. They were screwing with the program. They were sabotaging it from the very beginning. They knew what they were doing, and they were in constant contact with the other scientists in Europe and in Russia. Their mail was not monitored. Nothing was censored.
And Operation Paperclip was the parallel program to another program that was called Operation Overcast, which is where the United States attempted to bring in all of the anti-communist, anti-Soviet, and anti-Eastern Bloc political intelligence officers of the Third Reich. So what happened is the United States basically harvested all of these leaders of the Third Reich and brought them in and put them in charge of major, not only the rocket program of the United States, but the covert intelligence operations of the United States, so that we started taking on this kind of authoritarian, fascist, national security state element. And so our rocket program had two different faces: the NASA face, the pretty face, this peaceful face, the romantic face. And there was this other clandestine operation of building bigger and bigger and bigger missiles with the triple boosters, and so that we could deliver a payload right onto Moscow within a matter of minutes. So there's always been this schizophrenic quality to NASA and the rocket program in the United States. And Paperclip was the code name for the beginning of this kind of a schizophrenic program.
Although there was outrage that the United States was bringing in the so-called enemy into its most secret institutions, no one really tried to stop Operation Paperclip. It was the Germans' research into Die Glocke, or bell technology, that made their entrance into America so important. The Americans had toyed with anti-gravity technology before through the work of Nikola Tesla and T. Townsend Brown. This interest was realized in the famous Philadelphia experiment, in which a ship was made to disappear and reappear miles away. But it was only with the migration of German scientists after World War II that the United States got a jump start on these technologies.
Anti-gravity technology has been suppressed since the first studies showed that this was very feasible, and I think that it dates from the Los Angeles air raid incident of 1942, where the Army and the Navy were able to retrieve some craft that were shot down by the artillery barrage. And when they studied it, they actually found that these technologies, anti-gravity, were feasible, but the war effort meant that they couldn't really investigate it until the war was completed.
And in the 50s, you had people like T. Townsend Brown and others openly talking about gravity control, gravity research, doing anti-gravity. It was a topic that was being tossed around quite a bit. But suddenly, in the late 50s, they just put a lid on it. You didn't hear about this. You didn't hear about scientists talking about gravity control or artificial gravity or anything like that. Everything suddenly switched to rockets, jets. They also essentially suppressed knowledge of Tesla. And that was part of the thing, is that NASA and the military, they wanted us to think of space travel as being something that's done with rockets, lighting a big giant firecracker under your ass, and going to the moon. But Tesla died in 1943 during the war. If he had survived World War II and had in any way been part of our space program, we would have a completely different space program, one that with electric type of craft, anti-gravity, all of those things.
The other part of it is the technology. So when people hear this information, they are shocked that beginning in 1954, October, we didn't need surface roads. We'd figured out zero-point energy from studying not only what humans were developing from the era of Tesla and T. Townsend Brown, who was the genius who was doing things with high-voltage systems and crystals with things levitating. Literally, that was going on in the late 20s, and it was reproduced in Germany before World War II in the late 20s, the Kolosky-Frost experiment. What you see is that stream of covert research into high-voltage, high-frequency electromagnetic fields that would give you free energy and levitation, joined with the reverse engineering of extraterrestrial vehicles in the mid-40s and after Roswell, and perhaps even before Roswell. Add to that at the end of World War II, the OSS that became the CIA went to Germany and acquired a disk and also a bell-shaped object that Adolf Hitler was working on, which was his secret weapon, which this is 100% true, which was based on so-called anti-gravity and electromagnetic fields. Proper term is electromagnetic gravitic. So electromagnetogravitic, EMG. So those were brought over under Operation Paperclip. So all that secrecy from the World War II era on became more and more compartmentalized the more they had breakthroughs, including in October '54, gravity control was mastered. Now, a man who was at the Naval Research Labs, the biggest Department of Defense lab in the United States, personally told me that he was in the vault. And his name's Rick Foch. He had been in the vault and seen the documentation that we had mastered gravity control in October '54. And also, before that, this free energy, zero-point energy. So that means that if that were to come out, it would be the end of oil, gas, coal, nuclear power, centralized utilities, road construction, surface roads, engines and ships, rockets, jets, all of it's obsolete. We would lift the burden that we have placed upon Gaia because we have overstayed our welcome in terms of the technological system we're using, which is really an 1800s paradigm of fossil fuels. Even atomic power, nuclear power, is from the mid-40s. So everything since the mid-40s is in a black box, and we're killing the planet, keeping it secret.
Reverse engineered and suppressed technologies. What types of technologies could be suppressed by the criminal elements of our national security state? A good starting point comes from the Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive, one of the best resources for citizens' disclosure of the ET and UFO phenomenon. The following document is the result of a FOIA request to the Defense Intelligence Agency concerning all products produced under the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or ATIP. The documents provided by the DIA included 38 reports, one of which contained an unclassified and a classified version. These reports are called 1. Inertial electrostatic confinement fusion. 2. Advanced nuclear propulsion for manned deep space missions. 3. Pulsed high-power microwave technology. 4. Space access. 5. Advanced space propulsion based on vacuum. 6. Biosensors and biomems. 7. Invisibility cloaking. 8. Traversable wormholes, stargates, and negative energy. 9. High-frequency gravitational wave communications. 10. Role of superconductors in gravity research. 11. Anti-gravity for aerospace applications. 12. Field effects on biological tissues. 13. Positron aerospace propulsion. 14. Concepts for extracting energy from the quantum vacuum. 15. An introduction to the statistical Drake equation. 16. Maverick inventor versus corporate inventor. 17. Biomaterials. 18. Metamaterials for aerospace application. 19. Warp drive, dark energy, and the manipulation of extra dimensions. 20. Technological approaches for controlling external devices in the absence of limb-operated interfaces. 21. Materials for advanced aerospace platforms. 22. Metallic glasses. 23. Aerospace application of programmable matter. 24. Metallic spintronics. 25. Space communication implications of quantum entanglement and non-locality. 26. Aneutronic fusion propulsion. 27. Cockpits in the era of breakthrough flight. 28. Cognitive limits on simultaneous control of multiple unmanned spacecraft. 29. Detection and high-resolution tracking of vehicles at hypersonic velocities. 30. Aneutronic fusion propulsion 2. 31. Laser lightcraft nanosatellites. 32. Magnetohydrodynamics MHD, air-breathing propulsion and power for aerospace applications. 33. Quantum computing and utilizing organic molecules in automation technology. 34. Quantum tomography of negative energy states in the vacuum. 35. Ultracapacitors as energy and power storage devices. 36. Negative mass propulsion. 37. State-of-the-art and evolution of high-energy laser weapons. In Dr. Stephen Greer's book, Unacknowledged, he documents the history of the secret space program. Here are several passages that bring forth the story from the end of World War II to the present day. Quote, the Eisenhower years, 1953 to 1961. The events at Roswell resulted in the acquisition of a living being, as well as many deceased members of an intelligent interstellar species, along with several craft containing a wealth of advanced technologies that could be reverse engineered. Massive changes were underway. Within weeks of the Roswell event, the CIA was formed, along with the U.S. Air Force, which was split off from the Army Air Force. I have obtained a copy of a top-secret Canadian document dated November 21st, 1950, written by W.B. Smith, a radio engineer, addressed to the Canadian Department of Transport. Smith states, I made discreet inquiries through the Canadian Embassy staff in Washington who were able to obtain for me the following information. A. The UFO matter is the most highly classified subject in the United States government, rating higher even than the H-bomb. B. Flying saucers exist. Dwight D. Eisenhower took office in 1953. Knowing he had to be proactive without involving Congress, Eisenhower enlisted the help of his friend Nelson Rockefeller, a fellow member of the Council on Foreign Relations, to reorganize national security. With the Cold War in full swing, a revolution in Cuba, and the CIA placing the Shah of Iran in power, Rockefeller decided a new agency was needed that would be solely dedicated to UFO encounters while overseeing the incredible technologies that were being acquired through reverse engineering of these interstellar spacecraft. Majestic 12 was launched a year later as an independent agency operating on a black budget. From various sources, it appears its first members included Rockefeller, Secretary of Defense Charles E. Wilson, CIA Director Alan Dulles, Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Admiral Arthur Radford, and FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. There were also 6 men selected from the Council on Foreign Relations and 6 from the Jason Society, a scientific group formed during the Manhattan Project. Policies could only be mandated by a majority vote of 12, thus the name. By the end of the Eisenhower era, the UFO ET projects were becoming increasingly compartmented away from legal, constitutional chain of command oversight and control. First-hand witnesses have told us that the president was furious. This was a former 5-star general who had seen the ET spacecraft and bodies for himself, and yet suddenly he was now being kept out of the loop. President Eisenhower soon realized he had lost control of his Frankenstein's monster. Majestic 12. The entity established by President Eisenhower and Nelson Rockefeller in 1956 as Majestic, or MJ-12, has become the largest RICO, racketeer-influenced and corrupt organization in the world. While their name has changed from MJ-12/Majestic 12 to C-Corps to PI-40 and now Magic, it's just one society. There are sweeping conspiracy theories about the Masons, Bilderbergers, Trilateral Commission, and the Council on Foreign Relations. I know people in all of these entities, and most of them know nothing about the subject. It's much more prosaic and nuanced than that. They feel threatened because disclosure and the introduction of zero-point energy would decentralize power from the current oil-based economy. We have testimony about what the agenda is from people who've been on the inside, and some of it is absolutely frightening. The infrastructure needed to maintain and expand secrecy to a level which can deceive presidents and CIA directors, senior congressional leaders, European prime ministers, and the like is substantial and illegal. Let me be clear. The entity which controls the UFO matter and its related technologies has more power than any single government in the world or any single identified world leader. This cabal is a hybrid, quasi-government, quasi-privatized operation which is international and functions outside of the purview of any single agency or any single government, all of which are kept outside the loop. Rather, a select, tightly controlled and compartmentalized black or unacknowledged project controls these matters. Access is by inclusion alone, and if you are not included, it does not matter if you are the CIA director, President of the United States, Chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, or UN Secretary General, you simply will not know about or have access to these projects. Instead, the situation is so dire that senior Joint Chiefs of Staff leaders in the Pentagon, whom I have briefed, have no more access to such projects than any other civilian, unless they are on the inside. But this is rare. Essentially, the covert management of this matter operates as part super-secret international government program and part privatized organized crime operation. It's more like a secret mafia than a government entity. The inescapable reality is this. This secret entity, no matter how well-intentioned initially, got carried away with its own secret power and, in the course of this abuse, it hijacked our future for the last 70 years. But the situation is actually much worse than this, for this covert group running these UFO-related Black Op projects have also had exclusive sway over the early days of an embryonic extraterrestrial-human relationship. And it was tragically mismanaged, nearly to the point of genuine global catastrophe. For what happens when an unelected, unappointed, self-selecting, military-oriented group alone has to deal with interspecies relations between humans and ETs? Through their militaristic shaded glasses, every new and uncontrolled development will be viewed as a potential or real threat. The nature of such a group, which is inordinately controlled and incestuous, is that it is homogeneous in worldview and mindset. Power and control are preeminent qualities. Such extreme secrecy creates a very dangerous milieu in which checks and balances, give and take, are utterly lacking. And in such an environment, very dangerous decisions can be, and no doubt have been made, that affect all of us. In such an environment of extreme secrecy, militarism, and paranoia, we have found that immensely dangerous actions have been taken against the ETs. Indeed, we have multiple inside sources who have described to us the use of increasingly advanced technologies to track, target, and destroy extraterrestrial assets. If there is even a 10% chance that this is true, I am convinced it is 100% accurate, then we are dealing with a global diplomatic and social crisis which is utterly out of control, but which puts the entire planet at risk. Who's in this covert group? There's a committee of 200 to 300 people who are on the policy board for this issue. Admiral Bobby Ray Inman, who went from head of the National Security Agency to the board of SAIC, which is one of the crown jewels of this covert entity, is a member. So is Admiral Harry Train. George Bush Sr., Cheney, and Rumsfeld are involved, as is the Liechtenstein banking family. The Mormon corporate empire has an enormous interest in this subject. They have much more power than the White House or the Pentagon over this issue. And there are secret cells within the Vatican. Unacknowledged Special Access Programs, or USAPs. By the end of the Eisenhower era, these secret UFO ET projects became increasingly compartmentalized, disappearing within a sophisticated military-industrial labyrinth created between insiders within the Defense Department, who in turn channeled billions of black ops tax dollars into the coffers of some of the biggest defense contractors in the world. These special access programs, now free of congressional oversight, became known as Unacknowledged Special Access Programs, or USAPs. What is a USAP? It is a top-secret, compartmentalized project requiring special access even for those with a top-secret clearance, and it is unacknowledged. This means that if anyone, including your superiors or even the president, asks you about it, you reply that no such project exists. In other words, you lie. People in these USAPs are dead serious about keeping their project under wraps, and they are prepared to do anything to maintain the secrecy. And the granddaddy of all USAPs is the UFO ET matter. The majority of personnel are unaware of these illegal operations. Plausible deniability exists at many levels. Specialization and compartmentalization allows a number of operations to exist without those involved even knowing that their task is related to the UFO and ET subject. For those who are aware, the financial inducement and the penalties for violating secrecy are extraordinary. One senior covert source has related to us that at least 10,000 people have received in excess of $10 million in bribes each, while TWEP orders, terminate with extreme prejudice, have been carried out against those individuals and their families who are perceived as threats to break the code of silence. Presidents kept out of the loop have been issued warnings to back off. In June of 1963, President Kennedy was flying to Berlin to deliver his famous speech proclaiming, "I am a Berliner." On board Air Force One was a military man who relates the following. Kennedy, on the long flight, at one point began discussing the UFO matter. He admitted that he knew the UFOs were real, had seen the evidence, but then stated, "The whole matter is out of my hands, and I don't know why." Kennedy said that he wanted the truth to come out, but that he couldn't do it. And this was the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, stating that the matter is out of his hands, and he doesn't know why. I wonder if he found out before he was killed later that year. My own life has been threatened several times, and I have lost dear friends and colleagues who were murdered. How have things gotten so out of control? Greed is certainly at the top of the list. The annual USAP black budget has been conservatively estimated at between $80 billion to $100 billion a year. Trillions of dollars of taxpayer monies have been secreted into various aspects over the last 7 decades, paying for the reverse engineering of extraterrestrial technologies, experiments with nonlinear propulsion and communications systems, the construction of man-made alien reproduction vehicles, or ARVs, massive public disinformation campaigns, hoaxing and/or simulation of false ET events intended to deceive the public, the construction and upkeep of secret subterranean bases completed without the oversight, permission, or knowledge of our elected officials, the weaponization of space, and billions of dollars in payoffs. I share this disturbing glimpse into the military-industrial contracting world to illustrate how USAPs hide money in dummy projects while the real money is diverted to super-secret exploits not disclosed to Congress, the President, or the American people." End quote. For a great analysis on the structure of these unacknowledged special access programs, I highly recommend Richard Dolan's hour-long and 5-hour deep dive into the Admiral Wilson memo. The evidence could not be stronger that many of our modern-day Vimanas are human-made crafts or alien reproduction vehicles built on reverse-engineered extraterrestrial technologies. Now, if the cabal controlling these technologies would be willing to suppress free energy for the world, what else could they be capable of? Could these majestic 12 psychopaths have used this technology for crisis initiation and the creation of false flag events? Would these technologies be particularly useful in the transportation of illicit contraband? Would they be willing to kill inventors of free energy devices, like Stanley Meyer, the inventor of a water-powered car, whose last words during a meeting with potential investors was, "They poisoned me"? Would the warmongers with this tech be so idiotic as to provoke conflict with our neighbors to the sky? Could they even be so stupid and evil as to collude with demonic forces in their efforts to weaponize space? Truth is stranger than fiction. Craft retrieval, psionics, and high-powered microwave weapons. As strange as the truth is about man-made alien-reproduced Vimanas, the reality of extraterrestrial-built and piloted Vimanas is even crazier. Here is a recent interview of Jake Barber, who participated in craft retrieval programs in psionics with the U.S. military.
My name is Jacob Barber, and for the last 30 years, I've worked for the U.S. government and its private partners in both an official capacity as an enlisted man in the United States Air Force and in a non-official capacity for the broader intelligence community as a contractor. Over the last 3 decades, my work has been very diverse and has included the recovery of downed UAP of non-human origin. I am pleased to share that as of a couple weeks ago, I have fulfilled a promise to our friend David Grush by getting myself into a skiff with Congress, and I have provided top secret SCI testimony on the subject matter of UAP. With this behind us, I'm pleased to be at a place where I can share information with the public.
So before you flew out that day to go and do the recovery of the egg, what were you told?
I was told that we were going out to do our normal thing. We were going to provide range security, and we transport crew, and we're doing our normal range work.
You weren't told that this was an anomalous craft that was clearly of non-human origin?
No, and I genuinely believe no one else knew this was going to happen either.
It was a shock to everyone.
I think it was a shock to everyone.
And at no stage were you ever subsequently told that the craft was of non-human origin?
No.
So how do you know it wasn't human? How do you know that we don't have top secret tech that is shaped like an egg?
Right. Well, I'll tell you that because of the reaction of my leadership structure and because of my experience working in that capacity, everyone involved was convinced that what we were seeing and dealing with was, in fact, exotic in its origin. I will also tell you that during this process over the last couple of years, it's been confirmed to me by ranking members of the UAP task force that what we were working with that night was, in fact, NHI, and it was not a unique experience. The egg, as we're referring to, is known by, and there have been many others that have encountered this type of craft in our atmosphere, outside of our atmosphere, broad day, nighttime, all over the place.
You got a good look at this object, didn't you?
Yeah.
Was there any visible propulsion system on it?
No, not what we would know. There's no engine, there was no thermal signature. I was operating at night when I finally came in to pick it up, so I'm working under night vision goggles at the time. And it was quite clear. I flipped them up, flipped them down, and looked at it a couple of different ways.
Was there a thermal signature?
There was not a thermal signature.
So it wasn't hot?
No.
No. You know, the general laws of thermodynamics, you know, if an object's been flying or driving an engine, it's going to show heat, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
So how do you think that object was being propelled?
Well, that's a great question that we're looking forward to exploring with our new venture. During the recovery of the object at nighttime, I make my way in the helicopter from where we configure the line and we fly to where what we call the pick site. There's 2 locations. We designate them pick site, drop site. Drop site at the delivery location. We have a crew both at the pick site and the drop site on the ground. The pick team configures the cargo for flight.
So whatever it is, the craft is sitting in a sling waiting for your helicopter.
Yeah, it's sitting. We have these things called pumpkins, which are like rubberized bags or containers. And from my point of view, it was covered in a pumpkin, at least from the bottom and the sides. This is one of the most profound experiences I've ever had in my life I'm about to share with you, so bear with me. This is, for me, when it became clear. As I get closer to this PIC site, I start feeling odd. I start feeling extremely emotional. And the closer I get, the more the emotion starts to overwhelm me. And
what do you feel? What's the emotion?
I feel a sense of my mother. I don't know how else to explain it. I feel this intense hybrid of sadness, and happiness, and beauty, and song. And it was very disruptive to me because I had a very practical responsibility at the time to operate a helicopter in the mountains at night. And I began wondering what was wrong with me. It was late. I'm like, am I just stressed? Am I tired? Am I marinating in cortisol and estrogen? I don't know. But as I came over this object for the PIC, there was this overwhelming sense of emotion.
What's it saying, the object? Tell me what you're feeling.
Like I said, it was an overwhelming sense of sadness, happiness.
Is it your feeling? Are you suddenly having a mental breakdown on the job?
No, I felt like something connected with me. I felt like something had tuned in to me and my soul and was providing me some sense of guidance on what to do and how profound what I was doing was. And it was so overwhelming that I began to cry. And
I can't imagine crying at nighttime with night vision goggles is the healthiest way to fly a chopper.
No, it is not. And then I'm confused as to why I'm crying at the same time. And then do I abort the mission? So I just did my best to focus on my particular cues when doing this type of work. And I got the load hooked up and I began flying away. And once it was just me and that object in between the PIC and the drop site, there was about 20 miles in between, I felt like something was inside of me. I felt like I was possessed by the most beautiful spirit I'd ever been possessed by. And
was it loving?
It was loving. But there was a sense of sadness at the same time. And
had you ever had an experience like this before?
No, it was a very feminine energy, I'll tell you that. It felt like the spirit of God, but not in any masculine sense that I had ever felt. It was like, again, the feeling of my mother and my daughter and beauty. And it wasn't like a soul, it was like a frequency that I was connected with.
Was it scared?
I don't know if it is a thing. I'm still trying to figure out why that happened. I don't want to say that because I have a pretty good idea of what's going on now. And whatever that force was since that night, it has stayed with me. And as crazy as this sounds, it's what's guiding me now. And it's what's providing protection for me.
It's changed your life.
It's changed my life.
Do you think it's made you a better person, that experience?
It has made me a more sensitive and aware person, which I think all of us would be better people.
So that was a moment when you became aware of, at the very least, a technology that had the capacity to touch you remotely.
Remotely.
Telepathically.
Telepathically.
Now, telepathy, we are told, is a nonsense. It's a fiction. So what happened after you flew the object in the sling to presumably the drop-off zone?
Once I made the drop, Before I got there, I was really scared that I was going to have to stop flying and punch this thing off because I was so distracted. But then I was like, well, crap, now we've got another recovery site. Now we're going to have to recover this. I'm going to have to emergency land. I don't know. So it took everything I had in me at the time to get to my drop site, and I delivered this. Oddly enough, no one in my crew reported having similar effects from this. I do not believe there was a being in that craft. I've come to understand now, after being involved with other parts of the programs that are tested on the range, that there is a known and researched and implemented emotional or psychic, or what we call a psionic component to the research and development of the UAP program. The night that I had this experience, there was another team involved, come to find out was a psionics team, and they were also working that night.
And do you think it was them that had attracted the object in the first place?
Yeah, I do.
And so how did the object come to land?
I think it was invited to land by the psionics team.
Is that always how they make the objects land?
No, there's a number of other ways. So I have to tell you that weapon systems are tested out there.
I know this from other sources. I know that high pulse microwave weapons are being used to bring down some of these craft.
Yes.
Now, how often was it done where the objects would land on their own accord, and how often was it done that weapons would be used?
Yeah, I can't tell you how often. I can tell you they are brought down both ways, that they are invited to land by the psionics team. Other times they are invited in by the psionics team, but then HPMs, which are high-powered microwave weapons, are deployed, and they have an effect where they can disrupt the flight pattern of the object, and when it is an object, sometimes it's not, and it can result in that aircraft being forcibly brought down.
When they did the attraction of the objects, was it purely psychic, or was there machinery that was used as well?
So there's 5 components to our operation, which might answer a lot of your questions. So the first component is a calling phase. Calling is either through man or machine-based summoning systems. We have man-based systems, which are our psionic assets, which make a connection through intuition or consciousness with the object and can invite it in. The other is a machine-based calling system, which uses many systems, which I'm not going to go into detail about. You could refer to them as a dog whistle or a lure. And UAP, certain types seem to be specifically attracted or responsive to our machine-based calling systems. And then from there, once they're brought in, we communicate with them. Now, the psionics can have a dual role, because in this communication phase, we do a lot of data collection. So it's verifying that what we are seeing is something tangible, also that it is responding to our efforts. So we might invite it to move left or right, or to position our particular machine-based systems in a particular direction, and then measure the response.
The implication of what you're saying is that this intelligence that's behind these objects, whatever it is, seems willing to share.
Yeah, I think it ultimately is working for us. And it is commonly talked about that what we are getting, even when we weaponize it, is a donation, a gift. And even when we deploy equipment, when there's a combined operation with a psionics team and a machine-based team, all the equipment kind of has to be blessed and brought in when it's a psionically led operation for summoning.
So this is an ontological shock, I think, for many people watching this, because we're all being told, firstly, there's no such thing as aliens visiting this planet.
Yeah.
And secondly, we're all being told there's no such thing as telepathy or psychic abilities. It's rubbish.
Yeah, I don't think there is going to be an ontological shock. I think people are going to react to it the same way I did. I think it's going to be an ontological relief, because I think everyone deep down knows that there is more to life than what we are being told and experiencing. And to know that there might be something like a sixth, seventh, eighth sense that has a spiritual connection, and that might actually have a good nature and application behind it, like, not only is it not shocking, but it should be welcomed, I would think.
Well, I'd go further, Jake. It's beautiful.
It's beautiful.
And isn't that the message you got from whatever that intelligence
Overwhelming
was?
sense of beauty. Overwhelming.
And love?
And love.
And it's funny hearing an elite soldier talking about love and benevolence.
You know what fuels every elite soldier? Is a preservation of love or something that they love. That's what's behind all the strength.
So let's go through the psionic program. When a psionic operator engages with technology, how do they do it?
Using their mind, something like meditation. And I need to preface this by saying this is stuff that I've come to know recently.
In the course of your high-value target investigation, you met Dr. Stephen Greer.
Yeah, I did.
What was the purpose of meeting Dr. Stephen Greer?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that, you can say what you want about Dr. Greer, but the guy's been 30 years ahead of everyone else on a lot of the details of this subject.
So a lot of what he says is correct.
To me, he's like the Bentwaters. Like, we had everything we needed in 1980, and now we're fishing around for morsels of that. This guy, he's been ahead of everyone. And what I find quite funny is the one thing he gets the most shit for is the one thing he's probably most right about, and that is his CE5 protocol.
So CE5 is when he uses meditation and he claims it engages telepathically with the phenomenon.
Yeah, that's his term for it. Like, we don't use CE5. We don't use Dr. Greer's protocol. No to other people in the program or subsequent programs.
So CE5 is real?
Yeah, if we're going to use his term. I'll tell you what is real is the ability to go into something like a meditative state and summon UAP and pilot UAP. That is real. That's 100% real.
Wow. I have to process that for a moment, because that is just the most extraordinary claim.
Yeah. Well, we hope to prove it soon.
Truth is stranger than fiction. Comprehensive assessment of the UFO and ET phenomenon. So who are these ETs? Why have they chosen to monitor us and at times to visit us in their Vimanas? The most coherent analysis of the UFO and ET phenomenon I've read again comes from the Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive. In May of 1991, Dr. Stephen Greer wrote the following 30 years ahead of when the rest of the world was ready to listen. Quote, "The CSETI Comprehensive Assessment of the UFO/Extraterrestrial Intelligence, or ETI, phenomenon, May 1991. A comprehensive analysis of the UFO phenomenon, as well as original research and experience of members of the CSETI CE5 Initiative Working Group, has enabled us to make some specific conclusions about UFOs, extraterrestrial intelligence, and their motives. The summation of this analysis, which follows, is intended to assist both groups and individuals in their efforts to understand this complex subject. We have recorded only those conclusions for which we have a high level of certainty. General conclusions. Some UFOs are extraterrestrial spacecraft, or ETS, which are piloted by extraterrestrial biological entities, or EBs, who originate on another planet and most likely another star system. More than one extraterrestrial civilization is represented in the current activities involving Earth. These extraterrestrial civilizations are working in concert and not competitively, although there is some specialization in function and activities for the various groups. This indicates that there exists an emerging or well-established organization for these groups. These beings have bases within this solar system and may maintain temporary bases on Earth, particularly underwater. While various reports and speculations exist, we cannot at this time definitively state which planets or star systems are the home bases for these beings. Any specific information on this subject is very likely to be incorrect due to the security considerations of these beings. That is, given current human tendencies towards war, aggression, and violence, open disclosure of their planets of origin would put these planets at potential risk should human military interests unravel the energy and propulsion technology of their craft. The variety in sizes and shapes of ETS observed is due to A. Varying civilization of origin, and more importantly, B. Specialization of functions, which include general reconnaissance, medical research and intelligence, Earth environmental research, central command and base operations, energy generation and transfer, and human technology, military and space program research and reconnaissance. Sudden and fully open contact with human civilization has been avoided because of a number of interrelated factors, including A. The need to avoid an untimely disruption of Earth civilization, including military, political, geopolitical, cultural, economic, and technological and religious upheaval. B. Risks to their own civilization and people, as well as overall mission, given human xenophobia and tendencies towards violent armed reactions. And C. Up to this time, such massive and open contact has not been necessary and has not been consonant with their overall long-term mission and purpose, see the question of intent, since their purpose is not acquisition-oriented or disruptive. A plan is in place to allow for gradually broader and deeper contact with human society and individuals so that humans may become accustomed to the reality of other intelligent beings in the universe, and so that needed research and observations may take place on both sides. Limited but increasing opportunities for bilateral and human-initiated contact will occur in the reasonably near future. Sudden and large-scale contact will occur only in the event of a significant worldwide emergency, man-made or natural. While ETI observations and interactions with Earth is probably an ancient as opposed to purely modern phenomenon, the marked increase in activity coinciding with World War II and the dawning of the nuclear age indicates that ETI are quite concerned about this transitional stage of human social evolution. They are particularly concerned about human nuclear weapons and technology and potential threat to ETI, although this is nominal. These beings are further concerned with our peaceful transition to a world society, international peace, and the establishment of a just, effective, and representative world government expected to occur within 10 to 15 years or less. ETI technology is strictly guarded by both ETI and covert human agencies because of its potential for military applications, which would greatly threaten world security. It is imperative that this technology not find significant human applications until such time as the Earth attains international peace and an effective world government. The U.S. government, at least at the level of a highly compartmentalized, above top-secret group, has known about the reality of these ETS and their occupants since at least 1946. A strict secrecy and a worldwide cover-up of these facts has been maintained due to A. Fear of public panic and social disruption, B. Security issues surrounding possible military and technology applications of ETI technology, especially in the setting of a world beset with Cold War tensions and competing interests, C. Uncertainty and mistrust regarding ETI motives and ultimate intentions, and D. Embarrassment and loss of face resulting from disclosures concerning how this matter has been handled, such as the harassment and ridicule of innocent civilians and military personnel, the withholding of information from the public and Congress, etc. The U.S. government possesses several ETS and the deceased bodies of several EBs. While there is evidence to strongly suggest that these agencies are attempting to reverse engineer these craft, such efforts have not been functionally successful, although a number of secondary and partial discoveries have resulted from this research. The nature of reality of these craft and the beings has been incorrectly characterized by some as belonging to another dimension or reality from this dimension. Unfortunately, these statements are made without fully considering what this reality is. A more correct understanding is that the full spectrum of reality is a singular, integrated one, which may be perceived wholly or in its various aspects, such perceptions being entirely dependent on the level of consciousness of the perceiver. The various aspects of dimensions of this reality, which are limitless in number, are not restricted to or by time and space as we know it commonly. These beings and their craft belong to the same reality as humans, however, their advancement in the realms of physical science and the science of consciousness have given them competence in a broader aspect of the full spectrum of reality that is usually experienced by humans. The differences are not insurmountable, nor are they truly fundamental. In fact, they are relative and only temporary. While these beings are utilizing and experiencing a broader aspect of the full spectrum of reality, so too can and will humans, for we are as interdimensional by nature as they are. ETS energy and propulsion or space transfer systems utilize principles and laws of the physical universe not yet fully appreciated by human science and include A. Gravity/anti-gravity and electromagnetic/gravity technology. B. Space energy and so-called hyperdimensional energy systems. C. Matter/energy interchangeable technologies. And D. Possible consciousness-assisted technology, CAT, and technology-assisted consciousness, TAC. Some, if not all, EBs have advanced mental capabilities which include telepathy, precognition, remote viewing, and others, indicating that they have developed the science of consciousness to a degree which parallels or surpasses their advanced physical technologies. Humans also possess these capabilities, but these remain largely undeveloped by most humans. EBs are more developed or advanced than humans in a number of respects, but are not superior to humans as beings. Our point of unity and equality with EBs is our mutual existence as conscious, intelligent beings. While these various EBs may have values and priorities which are different from those of some 20th century humans, their motives and ultimate intentions are non-hostile and do not include the acquisition or subjugation of the earth or its people. See the question of intent. The establishment of a long-lasting world peace and just and effective world government is essential to the long-term ETI-human relationship. The question of intent. While not minimizing the strange and startling aspects of this phenomenon which some humans have experienced, our assessment of these visitors' motives and ultimate intentions is that they are decidedly non-hostile. Their primary operations and activities center around general reconnaissance of Earth and her societies, military, especially nuclear observations and assessment, human social and psychological study and observations, observation and assessment of human mental and spiritual development, Earth ecology research and documentation, including documentation of Earth life systems and mineral, plant, and animal specimens, observation of human technology and technological developments, observation, active monitoring, and, if necessary, limitation of human space programs, particularly those directed towards the nationalistic colonization of space. Careful interactions with humans to convey certain information about themselves and to accustom humans to their presence. Our assessment is that these activities are derived from several ultimate motives, which include 1. Pure study and research of a rapidly developing intelligent species, humans, during a time of transition to a world community. A needed increase in ETI knowledge of world societies and human nature preparatory to future significant interactions, which will be mutual in nature and which will eventually culminate in the introduction of Earth civilization into an interplanetary network. This may require several centuries to complete. Preparatory activities for continued readiness in the event that intervention is required during a major world emergency, such as a large-scale nuclear war. Such interventions would be in the form of A. Interception and destruction of intercontinental ballistic missiles or ICBMs, B. Alternation of missile coordinates and readiness, and C. Emergency Earth-based activities when and where warranted. The minimum intervention necessary would be used, with the intention being the preservation of Earth as an inhabitable planet with adequate human resources remaining to sustain intelligent life here. 4. Emergency intervention in the event of an environmental or geological catastrophe of worldwide dimensions. 5. Preservation of Earth species, including human genetic preservation and or augmentation as a precaution in the event of a worst-case scenario. See above. 6. Protection of space from hostile or military utilization by human national interests. 7. ETI self-protective interests, insofar as humans have a strong recent history of coupling marked aggressiveness with rapid technological advancement. In this setting, monitoring and perhaps even limiting human capabilities may be important to ETI security. Human evolution to world peace, non-aggression, and world government would remove this motive as well as several of the motives listed above. 8. ETI short and long-term goals related to the attainment of a significant human paradigm shift from one of fragmentation/separation to one of unity, to include the unity of science and religion, world political and eventual spiritual unity, and universal unity. This paradigm shift is dependent on the development of human consciousness, which is of particular interest to ETI, and 9. the preservation and advancement of intelligent life in this universe. End quote. Truth is stranger than fiction.
Welcome to the Andromeda Galaxy.
Let me take you for a spacewalk. Collect stars like the pavement in LA. Anyway, every day I shine brighter than the quasar. Light work. Play hard, that's the card I'ma play. Move like the creator, build home in the day. Stay cool, you can dig it like a mole in a maze. Right, hit the stage with the stage, let the smoke wash over any storm in my way.
Excuse me, can you please pass me the lighter? Thanks.
Yeah, I'm talking light work, giving love to the people that might wanna fight first. Might lurk in the dark to provide a light burst to the ones looking for a better way to light Earth. In another vibration, ventilation, breathe in and stop hating. Work. Here's a mantra I use every day. Light work. Play hard, that's the card I'ma play. Yo, I know the secret about this place called space, forever expanding, moving at rates never named, reaching your consciousness, cause it's all the same. Create the waves to evolve your DNA strain. We're all gods and I promise to ya, they need to suppress the best when they're not familiar. Cause if you knew what's inside, the power would magnify all the vibes that provide. The resonant tone for light work. Power up the crystals, time for light work. Peep the cymatics and add it to light work. If you fall for panic, then pad it with light work. I'm loving this light work. I get filled with purpose when mentioning light work. To another light being that makes it their life work. To shine bright like a diamond. Yup, that's light work. Yo, welcome to the edge of the Milky Way. It took a second cause I'm still on the ill delay. Let me kick a lesson that I learned from the will to stay rooted in the middle of the mood that I feel today.
Now pay attention.
You see, feeling is emotion. When you put that all in motion, you got spiritual bills to pay. So be careful what you think, and love should be the mission. On the real or you will decay.
Now, was that a little too deep?
And you don't want that, do ya? If you do, hang it up like a coat rack, do ya? I'm the office, baby, let me send facts to ya. When you show me love, I send it right back to ya. Yeah, it's in my nature like trees. Back it up, I'm too chill, you might freeze. If you want a good time, the vibes are with me. Let's party in new dimensions when love's the ID. Yo, I know the secret about this place called space, forever expanding, moving at rates never named, reaching your consciousness, cause it's all the same. Create the waves to evolve your DNA strain. We're all gods and I promise to ya, they need to suppress the best when they're not familiar. Cause if you knew what's inside, the power would magnify all the vibes that provide. The resonant tone for light work. Power up the crystals, time for light work. Peep the cymatics and add it to light work. If you fall for panic, then pad it with light work. I'm loving this light work. I get filled with purpose when mentioning light work. To another light being that makes it their life work. To shine bright like a diamond. Yup, that's light work. It's getting litty, let it spread through the city and leave them giddy. Just a little itty bit of the kickers enough to give me power. Leave it all on a tight verse and let it heal anybody with the light work. Litty, let it spread through the city and leave them giddy. Just a little itty bit of the kickers enough to give me power. Leave it all on a tight verse and let it heal anybody with the light work. Yeah, when it's dark you should lighten up. Try to find a jump high enough to fly about your funk. Life's not a scratch off, but you gotta try your luck. You don't want to be the one stuck, feeling kinda. Find a wormhole to a place so soothing where you get your own booth and you face the music like a stallion. Just get me to the mic first, cause I got the right vibe to provide this light work. The resonant tone for light work. Power up the crystals, time for light work. Peep the cymatics and add it to light work. If you fall for panic, then pad it with light work. I'm loving this light work. I get filled with purpose when mentioning light work. To another light being that makes it their life work. To shine bright like a diamond. Yup, that's light work.